He put a price on her body, a contract on her child, and called it a legacy. But the man who had ordered executions without blinking, the man who had never once in his 41 years on this earth lost sleep over anything he'd taken, stood outside a hospital room at 3 in the morning with his hands shaking so badly he couldn't light a cigarette. Because inside that room, the woman he'd purchased like an asset was fighting to bring his child into the world. And Damien Voss was only just beginning to understand what he'd actually done. If this story already has you, drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from in the comments below. I want to see how far this one travels. Now stay with me, because this doesn't end where you think it does. The snow had been falling on Chicago for 6 hours straight when Marcus Hale put the folder on Damien Voss's desk and stepped back far enough that he was no longer within arm's reach. That was always how it worked with Damien. You delivered bad news, and then you made yourself small, and you waited. Damien didn't look at the folder right away. He was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his 43rd floor office, looking down at the city the way a man looks at something he already owns. The lights of Chicago bled orange and white through the snow, and from up here you couldn't see the dirt. You couldn't see the blood. You couldn't see the 23 years of broken bodies and bought judges and burned buildings that had made all of this possible. From up here, it just looked like a kingdom. Mercer, Damien said. Dead. 2 nights ago. They found him in the river near the South Side docks. Marcus kept his voice flat, the way he'd trained himself to. Professional. No prints, no witnesses, no footage. Whoever did it knew exactly where our cameras are. Damien turned from the window then. He was 41 years old and he looked like a man who had never been tired a day in his life, which was a lie, but it was a convincing one. 6'2", shoulders that hadn't softened despite the suits, a face that had been handsome once and was now something harder, the kind of face that made people choose their words very carefully. He picked up the folder, opened it, looked at the photographs of what was left of Victor Mercer, his Eastern District lieutenant, and one of the 4 men in Chicago who actually knew the full architecture of Damien's operation. He closed the folder. The Rourke family, he said. Probably. Not probably. Damien set the folder down and walked to the bar along the east wall, poured 2 inches of bourbon into a glass, and did not offer one to Marcus. They've been circling for 8 months. They took out Mercer because Mercer knew the import routes, and they want leverage before they come to the table. He drank. Set the glass down. They want me to negotiate from weakness. What do you want to do? I want to not be in this position. He said it quietly, without anger, which was somehow worse than anger. I want to have a succession structure that makes me untouchable regardless of who they take out. I want an heir, Marcus. A real one. Not a nephew who gambles. Not a cousin who's already on 3 different federal watch lists. He turned and looked at Marcus directly. I want a child. Marcus had been Damien Voss's right hand for 11 years. He had sat across from him during contract negotiations, had stood behind him during executions, had helped him move 9 figures through a dozen different shell companies. Nothing surprised him anymore. Almost nothing. You're serious, Marcus said. I'm always serious. There are women who would... I don't want a woman who would. The sharpness in Damien's voice could cut glass. I want someone who doesn't know what I am, or knows and doesn't care about the money. Someone who won't spend the rest of her life trying to leverage a child against me. He moved back to the window. Someone controllable. Someone already inside the structure. Marcus understood then. He didn't like it, but he understood it. I'll look into the household staff, he said. Well, Elena Marlowe had been working in the Voss mansion for 14 months, and in that time she had learned 3 things about Damien Voss. First, he drank bourbon in the evenings, never more than 2 glasses, always alone. Second, he never raised his voice. The men who worked for him raised their voices. Damien did not, and somehow that was more frightening. Third, he noticed everything. She had figured that out 6 weeks in, when she was cleaning the East Wing study and accidentally moved a paperweight 3 inches to the left. She put it back exactly where it had been before she touched it. She was certain of the position. The next morning, Damien had come into the kitchen where she was preparing the breakfast trays, and he had said without looking at her, "The brass falcon on the study desk. Don't move it." She hadn't touched it again. Elena was 28 years old. She had grown up in Rockford, Illinois, 3 hours from Chicago, in a house where the heat got shut off every February, and her mother cried over unpaid bills at the kitchen table after she thought Elena was asleep. She had 2 years of college before the money ran out. She had worked retail, then waitressing, then cleaning offices, and eventually a staffing agency had placed her with a household management company that serviced high-end private clients in the Chicago area. She had not known, when she took the placement, exactly who Damien Voss was. By the time she understood, she had already needed the paycheck too badly to leave. She was not stupid. She was not weak. She had simply made a calculation, the same calculation she had made her entire adult life, about what she could live with and what she could not. She was very good at living with things, which was why, on the Thursday morning in late November when Marcus Hale came to find her in the laundry room and said, "Mr. Voss would like to speak with you in his office at 2 o'clock." Her first instinct was not panic. Her first instinct was to finish folding the shirt she was holding, set it on the stack, and say, "All right." She had never been in his personal office on the 3rd floor. She had cleaned the 2nd floor study, the library, the formal sitting rooms. The 3rd floor was locked except to people with specific access, and household staff was not on that list. The room was large and cold. Not cold in temperature, the building's climate control was precise to the degree, but cold the way rooms feel when no softness has ever been brought into them. The desk was mahogany and empty, except for a single legal pad and a pen. The walls were dark paneling. There were no photographs. Damien was sitting behind the desk when she came in. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, with complete attention and no particular warmth. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Do you know why you're here?" "No." He studied her for a moment. "You're not going to ask?" "You'll tell me." Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, more like the slight adjustment of a man recalibrating. "I'm going to make you a proposition," he said. "It will sound unusual. I'd like you to hear it completely before you respond." "Okay." He leaned back in the chair. "I need a child, a biological heir. I'm not interested in marriage, and I'm not interested in a relationship. I'm interested in a contract, a private, legally binding arrangement in which you agree to carry and deliver a child, after which you will be compensated and provided for financially for the rest of your life. The child will be raised in this household. You will have a defined role in that child's life, the specifics of which we would negotiate." He paused. "The compensation I'm offering is significant enough that you would never need to work again." Elena sat very still. She thought about her mother's kitchen table, the February heating bills, the 2 years of college that had just stopped. She thought about the way she'd watched Damien Voss walk past the staff kitchen 3 days ago without acknowledging that any of them existed. "How significant," she said. His expression didn't change, but she thought she saw something in his eyes. Not respect exactly. Recognition. He said a number. She didn't flinch. She had trained herself not to flinch. "And if I say no?" "Then this conversation never happened. You continue your position here at full pay, and nothing changes." "You won't fire me?" "No." "And you won't make things difficult?" "I don't do petty, Miss Marlowe. I find it inefficient." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look easily. He was not trying to charm her. He was not performing warmth he didn't have. He was just sitting there, patient and still, like a man who was genuinely accustomed to waiting for the right answer. It was, she realized, the most honest thing about him. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "Of course." He picked up his pen. "You have 48 hours." She spent 47 of them not sleeping. She walked the grounds of the estate in the cold, pulling her coat tight, thinking about the word contract and the way he'd said it, flat, transactional, completely without the attempt to dress it up. She thought about what he was actually asking, and she forced herself to look at it without flinching, because flinching was something she'd learned long ago was a luxury she couldn't afford. He was asking her to have his child. He was offering her financial freedom so complete that the number he'd named was the kind of thing that didn't just change your life. It ended one life and started another. She thought about the women who had been in his life before, because there had been some. She'd heard the other staff talk in the careful, sideways manner people use when they know they're discussing something they shouldn't. Beautiful women, the kind who wore the right things and said the right things, and understood that being with a man like Damien was a particular kind of performance. And all of them, every single one of them, was eventually gone. She thought about what it would mean to bring a child into this house. She thought about what it would mean to bring a child into this house and be present for it. Not as a purchased vessel, but as a mother with a defined role, with resources, with the ability to actually shape who that child became. She thought about what her mother would have been able to do for her with that kind of money. On the 47th hour, Elena Marlowe made a decision. But before she went back to Damien's office, she sat down at the small desk in her room and she wrote 3 things on a piece of paper. Not for him, for herself. I will not let this child be raised without kindness. I will not disappear when this becomes convenient for him. I will not become someone I'm ashamed of. She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket and went upstairs. I'll agree, she said, but not to the contract you described. Damien looked up from the papers he was reading. Explain. Your version makes me a service provider. I carry the child, deliver the child, and then exist in some defined capacity that you control. She held his gaze. I want joint decision-making on how the child is raised, not consultation rights. Actual input that I can't be overridden on in matters of the child's well-being. I'm not finished. She had not known, coming in here, whether she would be able to hold this. She was holding it. I want to live in this house for the duration of the pregnancy and for at least 3 years after the birth, not in the staff quarters, in a proper room. I want access to the child at all times unless I'm specifically told otherwise and have agreed to that limitation in writing. And I want the financial arrangement transferred to a separate account in my name within 30 days of signing, not contingent on the birth. The silence in the room was long enough that she started to wonder if she'd overplayed it. Damien set down his pen. You've thought about this carefully, he said. I've been thinking about nothing else for 2 days. Most people in your position would take what was offered and not negotiate. Most people in my position are afraid of you. You're not. She considered the question honestly because that was what she did. I think you're capable of things that should frighten people. I think you operate in a world where frightening people is the primary tool. But I also think you're practical, and what I'm asking doesn't compromise your goal. It just means the child will have a mother who's actually present. Which, she added, given that you want an heir and not just a biological product, probably serves your interests too. Damien looked at her for so long that the quiet started to feel like its own kind of pressure. Then he said, Accepted. I'll have the contract revised by morning. Elena nodded. She stood to leave. Miss Marlowe. She stopped. What you said about being afraid, he said. Most people lie about that. I know. You weren't lying. No. Why not? She turned to look at him. Because you asked a real question, and I don't see the point in giving you a fake answer. She left. Behind her she heard nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the particular silence of a man thinking harder than he expected to. The first months were strange, in a way that neither of them had frameworks for. The arrangement was, by design, clinical. A fertility specialist came to the estate. There were appointments in a private clinic on the north side of the city where Damien's name didn't appear on any paperwork. Elena attended. Damien sometimes attended and sometimes did not. They were polite to each other in the carefully managed way of 2 people who have agreed to something significant and are both privately uncertain about how to behave. Elena settled into the room they gave her, 2nd floor, east wing, overlooking the garden. It was larger than her entire apartment in Rockford had been. She unpacked her things slowly, almost reluctantly, because unpacking felt like a kind of commitment she wasn't sure she'd fully prepared for. She continued to be kind to the other staff. She didn't know if she did this consciously or not. It was just the only way she knew how to be in a place where she lived among other people. Damien noticed. She didn't know he noticed at first. He said nothing. He moved through his days with the kind of efficiency she'd come to recognize. Meetings, phone calls, the men who came and went through the private entrance at all hours. The occasional 3-day absence that no one in the household was supposed to ask about. He was a presence that organized itself around its own priorities and expected everything else to accommodate. But he started appearing in spaces where she was. Not intrusively, not obviously. He would come into the kitchen in the early morning when she was making tea and pour his coffee without comment, and stand at the counter reading something on his phone. He would be in the library in the evenings when she went to find a book. He would pass through the East Garden, a route that was not, she knew, his usual route. when she was walking in the afternoons. She didn't call attention to it, but she filed it away. At 9 weeks, the pregnancy confirmed itself in a way that was no longer abstract. She started feeling it in the mornings, a persistent nausea that hit before she was fully awake and didn't let up for 2 hours. She dealt with it the way she dealt with most things, quietly, without complaint, and without mentioning it. Damien found out on a Tuesday. He came into the kitchen earlier than usual, and she was standing at the counter over a glass of ginger water, very still, because stillness was sometimes the only thing that helped. "You're sick," he said. "It's normal, first trimester." He looked at her for a moment. "Does the doctor know the severity?" "It's not severe, it's morning sickness." "You look like you haven't slept." "I've slept fine." "You look like you haven't slept," he repeated, as if her contradiction hadn't happened. She set down the glass, turned to face him. "Mr. Voss, this is part of the process. It's not the complication. You don't need to manage it. I'm not trying to manage it." "What are you doing then?" He seemed to find the question genuinely difficult. She watched him work through it, the slight tightening around his eyes, the controlled stillness of a man who didn't like not having answers. "I don't know," he said, which, she thought, was probably the most honest thing he'd said since she'd walked into his office 6 weeks ago. She turned back to her ginger water. "You could sit down," she said, "if you want." He sat down. They were quiet together for a while, which was its own kind of remarkable, the two of them, in the large, silent kitchen with the early Chicago morning pressing gray against the windows. "Were you sick?" she asked. "When you were born, did your mother—" She stopped. "I'm sorry, that's personal. My mother died when I was 3. He said it without inflection, the kind of flat delivery that means a person has said the sentence so many times that it no longer requires anything from them. "I don't remember her." Elena nodded. She didn't say "I'm sorry" because she had a feeling he'd heard that particular phrase enough times that it had lost all meaning. "Who raised you?" she asked instead. "My father, until I was 11. Then myself." He looked at his coffee. "My father was also in this business. He was not," Damien added, "a man who believed in any of the things I'm apparently trying to create." She let that sit. Then, "What changed?" "Nothing changed. I just got tired of what he built. It collapsed inside of 5 years after he died. Every man he'd controlled for 30 years walked away or turned on each other inside a month." He drank, set the cup down. He thought fear was enough. It's not. Fear holds people for a while, and then it doesn't, and then there's nothing left because he never built anything real underneath it. "Is that what this is?" Elena said carefully. "Something real underneath it?" Damien looked at her across the kitchen. "I don't know yet," he said. She started decorating the nursery in the 4th month. She did it herself mostly because she wanted to. Not because she needed to. Damien had offered to have a designer come in, and she'd said no in a way that had ended the conversation. She bought paint samples and held them against the wall in the light at different times of day. She found furniture in small shops on the north side and arranged to have it delivered, which led to a brief argument with Marcus Hale, who felt that household purchases should go through household accounts. "It's my money," she said. "The transfer cleared. It's my decision." Marcus looked at her the way he looked at most things, with the particular blankness of a man who was calculating several things at once. Then he stepped back and let the delivery truck through. The room came together slowly. Warm cream walls, a rocking chair in the corner that she'd found in a second-hand shop and had reupholstered herself, a bookshelf already half full. She put her own books on it, the ones she'd carried from apartment to apartment for years, the ones with cracked spines and dog-eared pages, the ones her mother had read to her. Damien came to the doorway of the nursery one evening and stood there looking at it. She was on her knees, sorting books by size, and she heard him but didn't stop what she was doing. "You did all of this," he said. "Yes." "The designer I offered would have made something perfect," she said. "I didn't want perfect. I wanted warm." He was quiet for a moment. "Those are your books." "Some of them." "You were going to read them to the child." "I'm going to read them to the child," she said. Present tense, not negotiable. "Starting before it's born, actually. Research says they can hear from around 20 weeks. The sound of the voice is what matters. the rhythm of it. She heard him shift his weight in the doorway. A small sound, almost nothing. "Do they remember?" he said. "What they hear?" "Not consciously, but it creates something." She finally looked up at him. Familiarity, safety, the sense that the voice they're hearing is one they already know. He was looking at the rocking chair. His expression was very careful and very controlled, and she could see, underneath it, something she didn't quite have a word for. She thought, not for the first time, that whatever had made Damien Voss into what he was, it had started a very long time ago. And it had started early. Well, the trouble came at the 5-month mark, and it came from the west side. The Rourke family had been quiet since October. That quietness, Damien knew, was the kind that preceded pressure. They had taken Mercer. They had watched the subsequent 3 months of silence from Damien's side of the board, and now they had decided that silence meant softness. She heard the argument through 2 closed doors. She wasn't trying to hear it. She had learned early that the household had a geography of privacy, certain rooms, certain hours, certain voices that you simply didn't track. But the voices that night were different, sharper. And her room was at the end of the East Wing corridor, and the sound carried. She didn't make out words. She made out tone, which was sometimes more information than words. She lay in the dark with her hand flat on the slight curve of her stomach and listened to the cadence of men deciding things that other people would pay for, and she thought about the folded piece of paper still in her coat pocket, and she reminded herself that she had known what this house was when she agreed to live in it. In the morning, Damien was at the kitchen counter when she came down. He had not slept. She could see it in the set of his face, the particular tension of a man who has spent the night going through scenarios and doesn't like any of them. She poured her tea, sat down across from him. "You heard something last night," he said. "I heard people in disagreement. I didn't hear what about." "It would be better if you'd heard nothing." "Probably." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Is it the kind of problem that puts the child at risk?" He looked at her. "Why would you ask that first?" "Because that's the first thing that matters to me." She said it simply, without drama. Not the politics of it, not the money, just whether what's happening out there is going to reach in here. The silence stretched. "There are people who have recently become aware that I have something to lose," Damien said. "That's a different position from the one I've been in before. And there are people who believe that position is an exploitable weakness." "Is it?" He looked at her. "It might be." "And what are you going to do about it?" "What I always do." He stood, taking the coffee cup with him. "Respond to force with greater force." Elena watched him walk toward the doorway. "Does that work?" she said. He stopped but didn't turn. "It has for 20 years. "I know. But you said your father did the same thing for 30 years, and it collapsed in 5. She kept her voice even. Not challenging, just honest, because that was the arrangement they'd arrived at, whether they'd named it or not. Force holds things for a while, and then it doesn't, and then there's nothing left. He was still in the doorway, his back to her. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled stillness of a man holding something down. "Go back to bed," he said quietly. "You need the sleep." She did not go back to bed. She sat at the kitchen table and drank her tea and thought about the particular loneliness of a man who had spent 40 years learning how to be afraid of nothing and was now very slowly discovering that the lesson had a flaw. At 22 weeks, she started talking to the baby, not as performance, not because of anything she'd read, though she had read everything, just because by 22 weeks it had become real in a way that she was having trouble describing, a presence that demanded acknowledgement, a weight that was also, somehow, a person. She talked while she walked the garden. She talked while she was reading. She talked in the rocking chair in the nursery at night, sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer, about everything and nothing, about Rockford, about her mother, about books she'd loved, about the kind of person she was hoping to help become. She talked about how the world was complicated and cruel, and also, sometimes, unexpectedly worth it. Damien caught her at it once. She was in the garden in late January, the cold not quite biting through her coat, talking quietly to the swell of her own stomach about a novel she'd finished the night before, when she heard steps on the flagstone path and looked up. He stopped when he saw her. They looked at each other. "Don't," she said before he could say anything. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were going to have an expression." A muscle in his jaw moved. Not quite a smile. Something in the neighborhood of 1, taking a wrong turn. Keep walking, she said. Pretend you saw nothing. He walked, but he slowed as he passed her, and she heard him say very quietly, almost too quietly to catch, "What book?" She told him. He nodded once, barely, and kept walking. She looked back down at her own hands and felt something she didn't have a name for shifting quietly in her chest. In February, the Rourke family moved. Not the way Damien had expected, not the direct, declarable move that a man of his experience was prepared to meet. They moved sideways. The way people move when they've studied their opponent long enough to know that direct approaches are suicide. They got to 2 members of Damien's inner circle, not with violence. With money, which was always more reliable. Marcus brought Damien the information on a Wednesday morning. Elena heard about it 3 hours later, not from Damien, but from the particular quality of the silence that fell over the household, the way the staff moved more quietly, the way the men who came and went through the private entrance did so with their eyes down, the way even the building itself seemed to hold its breath. She found Damien in the library at 7 in the evening. He was standing at the window, and he was very still, and she could see in the set of his body that he was doing something she'd begun to recognize as his version of being lost. The way a man who has never allowed himself to be uncertain about anything responds when uncertainty arrives anyway. She sat down in one of the chairs near the window. She didn't speak. After a while he said, "2 men I trusted for 15 years. I know. You heard. I felt it. In the house." She looked at him. "I'm sorry." He turned slightly to look at her. The word seemed to genuinely catch him off guard. "You're sorry." That's what you say when someone loses something. Even if what they lost was trust, they should probably have been more careful with. She paused. "That came out wrong." "No, it didn't." He turned back to the window. "I know what I am, Elena. I know the rules of this. You trust people in this world, and eventually, some of them take the money, because the money is always eventually enough." His voice was flat, controlled. The flatness of someone controlling something that wants to come out sideways. "I knew that before I started, and I built accordingly. He stopped. "I was tired of it. I thought these 2 specifically were different." Elena was quiet for a moment. "They might have been different for 15 years, she said. "That's still 15 years. He looked at her. "People are complicated," she said. "They can mean it and then stop meaning it. That doesn't make the 15 years a lie. In my world, the end is the only part that matters." "Maybe that's the problem with your world." She said it gently. But she said it. Damien turned fully from the window and looked at her, really looked at her, the way he rarely did with anyone, without the layer of management between his face and what it was doing. "You're 6 months pregnant," he said. "You're sitting in my library at 7 o'clock at night, and you're—" He stopped. "What?" "I don't have a word for what you're doing." "I'm talking to you," she said simply. He was quiet for a long time. "I need to end this," he said eventually. "The situation with the Rourkes. Whatever I have to do. I won't have this hanging over the house when the child is born." Elena nodded. She had known this was coming. She had known since the night in January when he'd told her about force and greater force. She looked at him. "Whatever you do, don't do it in a way you can't walk back from. Don't do it in a way that makes you into something the child will eventually need to be ashamed of." He stared at her. "That's not something anyone has ever said to me," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't imagine it is." She pushed herself up from the chair, which took more effort now than it had 3 months ago, and she walked to the door. At the doorway, she stopped. "Damien." It was the first time she'd used his name. She hadn't planned it. He looked up. "Whatever you decide," she said, "come back." She left. Behind her, the library was very quiet for a very long time. The confrontation with the Rourke family happened on a Thursday night in early March. She didn't know the details. She didn't ask. What she knew was that Damien left the estate at 9 o'clock with 4 men and came back at 4 in the morning, alone. And when she heard the door, she was already awake because sleep had become unreliable in the 7th month, and she lay in the dark listening to his footsteps on the stairs. They stopped outside her door. She waited. He didn't knock, but she could hear him standing there, the barely there sound of breathing, of presence. Then the footsteps moved on. She lay in the dark with her hand on her stomach, feeling the child move in the particular restless way it had started moving at night. A turning, a settling, a small decisive movement that felt already like a personality. He came back, she thought. Whatever happened, he came back. She closed her eyes. The child moved again. Somewhere below in the house, she heard a single door close. She didn't sleep for another hour, but it was a different kind of not sleeping than it had been before. The morning after, he came to the nursery. She was in the rocking chair, which had become her habit in the mornings. The light came in from the east at that hour and fell warm across the floor, and she would sit and read or talk or just be still, and the child would respond to the rocking in a way that she was already certain was deliberate. He stood in the doorway. He looked like a man who had been through something and cleaned himself up after it and was now carrying the evidence only in the set of his eyes. "It's handled," he said. "Okay. The Rourkes won't be a problem, not for a long time." He paused. "No one was killed." She looked up at that. That was not always going to be the answer," he said, "but I found another way." She held his gaze. "What made you look for another way?" He didn't answer. He looked around the nursery instead, at the warm cream walls, the bookshelf with the cracked spines, the rocking chair she'd reupholstered herself. His eyes moved through the room, the way eyes move through something they're trying to understand. "When does the chair get delivered?" he said. "What chair?" "The one for—" He seemed to realize he hadn't prepared for this part of the conversation. "I thought, if you're going to be in here in the evenings, there should be somewhere else to sit." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "There's a shop on Dearborn," she said carefully. "They have a good one, brown leather. It would fit in the corner by the window. I'll send Marcus." "I'll go with Marcus," she said. "I want to pick it up myself." He nodded, turned to leave, stopped. "Elena." She waited. "The child will know," he said. It came out roughly, like a sentence he'd been constructing for a while. "What I am, what I was. I can't—" He stopped. "There's no version where that's not true." "I know," she said. "Does that—" He didn't finish the question. "It matters what you do with it," she said. "From now. Not what you were. What you do with it now." He stood in the doorway of the nursery with the morning light coming in behind him, and he looked like a man standing at the edge of something he had no map for. And then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, his face closed back down. All the usual shutters, all the careful management, back in place within a breath. "I have to take this," he said. "I know," she said. He answered the call and walked away down the corridor, and his voice retreated into something flat and controlled and entirely recognizable. And Elena sat in the rocking chair and listened to it fade and thought that the distance between the man who had just been standing in her doorway and the man speaking into that phone was both enormous and very, very small. The child moved. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach and felt the distinct, certain pressure of a foot, or a fist. She couldn't tell yet. She thought she might be learning to tell. 3 weeks later, she was sorting clothes in the nursery when she heard Marcus's voice from the downstairs foyer. A different quality in it, clipped and tight in a way that meant information being controlled. And then Damien's voice in response, and then nothing. She came to the top of the stairs. Damien was standing in the foyer below. He didn't look up. He was very still. Marcus said something she didn't catch. Damien turned and looked up at her then. The expression on his face was one she had not seen before. Not fear. Damien Voss did not have fear in his vocabulary, but something that lived in the same house as it. "Go back to your room," he said. "What's happening?" "Elena." His voice was absolutely controlled. "Please go back to your room." Marcus was already on his phone. Through the windows at the front of the house, she could see 2 black cars pulling through the gate that she had not heard called for. "Is it the baby?" she said. Her voice was steady. She didn't know how. "Is there a threat to—" "Not yet," Damien said. "I'm going to keep it that way." He looked at Marcus. "Get her upstairs. Get the north wing secured. Don't open the gate for anyone whose face you don't already know." He was already moving toward the private entrance. "Damien!" She said his name again, louder this time. He stopped, didn't turn. "What does not yet mean?" The pause was short. When he answered, his voice had the particular quality of a man choosing honesty over reassurance, which was, she had learned, the only version of him she trusted. "It means someone made a move tonight that changes things," he said, "and I have to go deal with it before it reaches this house." He pushed through the door. The cars outside peeled out of the drive before the door had fully closed behind him. She stood at the top of the stairs with her hand on the banister and her heart doing something irregular in her chest, and she understood, fully and without qualification, that the man she had watched walk out of this house had never. She pressed her hand to her stomach. The child was very still. And somewhere in the city, in the cold Chicago night, Damien Voss was driving towards something that might not let him come back. The city didn't sleep. It just changed what it was afraid of. Marcus found her still at the top of the stairs 20 minutes after Damien's cars had gone, her hand on the banister, her other hand flat against her stomach, and he stood at the bottom looking up at her with the particular expression of a man who has been trained to manage situations and has just encountered one he cannot categorize. "Come downstairs," he said. "Tell me what happened." "Mr. Voss wants you upstairs." "Mr. Voss isn't here." She came down the stairs slowly, one hand still on the rail, her weight shifted the way it had been shifting for weeks, the constant physical negotiation of a body that no longer belonged entirely to her. "Tell me what happened, Marcus." He looked at her for a long moment. The calculation behind his eyes was visible if you knew what to look for, and she had been watching Marcus Hale calculate things for over a year. "Someone hit one of our warehouses on the south side," he said finally. "Not product, personnel." "How many?" "2 men down, 3 in the hospital." He said it the way you say weather. "It wasn't the Rourkes, different signature." "Sure. Someone new. Someone who's been waiting," he said, "waiting to see how the Rourke situation resolved. Now they know Damien's attention was split, and they moved." Elena reached the bottom of the stairs. She looked at him straight. "And they know about me." Marcus didn't answer, which was its own answer. "How long have they known?" "We think 3 weeks, maybe a month." She absorbed that. 3 weeks. Which meant someone had been sitting on that information, deciding what to do with it, while she had been in the nursery picking paint samples and talking to her own stomach about novels. "Who?" she said. "A man named Carver. Gideon Carver. He runs the East Lakefront operations, gambling primarily, and some import work he does independently of any of the main families." Marcus paused. "He's not interested in territory. He's interested in leverage. And I'm leverage." "The child is leverage," Marcus said. "You are collateral." She held his gaze and did not let herself react the way she wanted to react, which was with the kind of rage that doesn't do anything useful. "How far away is Damien from resolving this tonight?" "I don't know." "Best guess." "It's not that kind of situation." Something shifted in Marcus's face. "Very small. Carver is not a man you resolve, he's a man you contain, and containing him requires finding out how much he already knows, and who else he's told it to." Elena stood in the foyer of the house that had been her home for 14 months, with the north wing locked down and men at the gate whose faces Marcus had already checked, and she understood very clearly for the first time what she had actually walked into. Not the abstract version, not the version she had negotiated in her head during those 47 sleepless hours before she'd gone back to Damien's office. The real version, with 2 men dead on the south side and her name in the mouth of someone she'd never met. "Take me to the kitchen," she said. Marcus blinked. "What?" "I'm hungry. I need to eat. Take me to the kitchen and stop looking at me like I'm about to break, because I'm not going to break, and it's insulting." She ate. Toast and eggs, which was what her stomach would accept at this hour, and she sat at the kitchen table while Marcus stood near the door, and his phone buzzed every few minutes with updates he read and did not share. At 2 in the morning, one of the gate men came in with a report. She caught 3 words: clean, no contact, holding, and then Marcus walked him back out and came back and stood near the door again. At 2:45, her back started aching, the particular ache of the 3rd trimester that started low and spread and could not be managed except by moving. She got up and walked, around the kitchen, into the corridor, back. Marcus watched her pace without saying anything. "You've worked for him for how long?" she said. 11 years. "Have you ever seen him actually afraid of something?" The pause was long enough to be its own answer. "No," Marcus said. "Tonight?" Another pause. "When he got the call?" "Before he left." Marcus looked at the floor. Yes. Elena stopped walking. She stood in the kitchen doorway and thought about Damien's face in the foyer, the expression she hadn't had a name for, the thing that lived in the same house as fear. He doesn't know how to do this, she said. Do what? Have something to lose. She leaned against the doorframe. He built everything on the assumption that he could afford to lose anything, that nothing mattered enough that losing it would change his calculations. And then she pressed her hand to her stomach. The child was awake, moving in the restless, incessant way it moved at night. And now the calculation is different, and he doesn't have a system for it. Marcus looked at her. Something in his face was unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. The tiredness of a man at 3 in the morning after 11 years of standing near doors. He's been different, Marcus said, since he stopped. Since I moved in. Since before that. Since he made the decision. He looked away. I've watched him make 100 decisions in 11 years. Territorial, financial, strategic. He makes them the way he does everything. Complete certainty. No hesitation. Full commitment to the outcome. He paused. He made this decision differently. How? He sat with it, Marcus said. For 3 days, he just sat with it. Didn't talk to anyone. Didn't ask me to research candidates. Didn't consult anyone legal. Just walked around this house for 3 days like he was trying to figure out if he was making a mistake. He said it flatly, factually, without judgment. I've never seen him do that. Elena was quiet. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at the screen. An unknown number. But the first 3 digits were a prefix she recognized from the clinic on the north side, the private one where Damien's name wasn't on any paperwork. She answered it. Miss Marlowe. The voice was male, smooth, and completely without urgency, which was somehow the most alarming quality it could have. My name is Gideon Carver. I apologize for the hour. The kitchen went very still. She could feel Marcus looking at her. She did not look back at him. Mr. Carver, she said. Her voice was level. She did not know how. How did you get this number? I get most things I go looking for, he said. That's something you should probably understand before we continue. Not a threat. Context. What do you want? A conversation. A pause. About your situation, which I think is more complicated than Mr. Voss has allowed you to understand. She watched Marcus move to her side. He had heard the voice through the phone. She could tell from his face. I understand my situation fine, she said. You understand the version he gave you, Carver said, which is a contract, some money, and a child in a house where the security is currently stretched because 3 of his best men are in the hospital and 2 are already in the ground. Another pause. And where the woman carrying his heir is standing in a kitchen at 3 in the morning talking to a man she's never met because that's where the evening went. She said nothing. I'm not your enemy, Carver said. I want you to understand that. I don't have any interest in hurting you or the child. What I have is information about what Damien Voss is planning that he has not shared with you. And I genuinely think, you have a right to know it before you're further into this than you already are. Then tell me. Not like this. In person. You must understand why I'm not going to agree to that. I do. Which is why I'm giving you 24 hours to think about it. His voice remained smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man who believed completely in the quality of his own patience. There's a place on Wacker Drive, a coffee shop called Hester's. Public. Busy even in the mornings. Completely safe for you. Tomorrow at 10. A pause. Come alone or don't come. But if you don't come, you're choosing to not know. And the thing about not knowing things in this world, Miss Marlowe, is that the things still happen. The line went dead. She lowered the phone from her ear. Marcus was already on his own phone, speaking quietly and rapidly, running the number. She stood and let him, looking at the dark kitchen window, at her own reflection in it, her own face, the slight change in her silhouette, the way her hand had gone automatically to her stomach. It's a burner, Marcus said. We can't trace it back. I know. She turned from the window. He said something about Damien planning something I don't know about. Don't. Don't what? Don't engage with it. Marcus's voice was flat, but not unkind. That's exactly what he wants. He plants a question, and then you can't stop pulling at it. What if there's something to it? There's always something to it. That's how these conversations work. He looked at her directly. You're not going to that meeting. I know, she said. But she said it to the window, not to him, and her reflection in the glass said something she didn't say out loud. Damien came back at 6:45 in the morning. She heard the car. She was in the rocking chair in the nursery, having given up on the idea of sleeping sometime around 4. And she heard the gate, heard the engine, heard the particular pattern of footsteps that the house had trained her to recognize. She heard him come up the stairs. He stopped in the nursery doorway. He looked like someone had put him through something and he had come out the other side of it still standing, which was, she was learning, basically his version of fine. There was a cut along his left jaw that had been cleaned but not properly closed. His suit jacket was gone. His shirt was untucked. She had never seen him with his shirt untucked. "You should be asleep," he said. "Someone called me at 3 in the morning," she said. "It made sleep difficult." His face changed, sharpened. "Who?" "Gideon Carver." She watched his jaw set, the small, controlled movement of a man getting hold of a reaction. He was very polite, very calm. He wanted to meet. "You didn't agree." "Of course I didn't agree." She looked at him from the rocking chair. "He said you're planning something you haven't told me about." "He's trying to create distance between us." "I know that." She kept her voice even. "But that doesn't answer the question." He came into the nursery then, which was not something he had done before. He had always stood in the doorway, at the threshold, as if crossing it required something he hadn't yet decided to give. He came in and sat down in the leather chair in the corner by the window, the one from the shop on Dearborn that Marcus had picked up on her instruction. He sat in it like a man sitting down for the first time in 20 hours. She waited. "The warehouse hit tonight," he said. "2 men. That was Carver's opening move. He's not interested in the warehouses. He doesn't need what's in them. He did it to demonstrate capability and to see how I respond." He rubbed the side of his face carefully, avoiding the cut. "The response he's expecting is escalation. That's the playbook. Hit back harder, show no softness, demonstrate that there are consequences. And if I do that, he's ready for it. He has a counter already prepared, and the counter involves making my situation public." Damien's voice stayed flat. Professional. The voice of a man reporting on a crisis that might as well belong to someone else. Not the business, not the operations. The personal situation. She went very still. "Me. The arrangement, the contract." He looked at her. "How it started." The nursery was very quiet. Morning was just beginning to show at the edges of the curtains. The gray Chicago dawn, colorless and cold. "He would tell people," she said. "He would make sure the right people knew. People who are already looking for reasons to question my decision-making. People who believe that a man in my position making this kind of personal choice is evidence of compromised judgment." He paused. "And once it's out, it becomes a liability I can't close. Everyone with an interest in taking me down has a new angle." "Because you paid for a child." He held her gaze. "Yes. Because you treated a human being like a contract." The words landed. She had not planned them to land that way. She had not planned them at all. But they were out now, and Damien Voss was sitting across from her in the leather chair she had picked out herself. And the morning was coming in around the edges of the curtains, and she was tired in the particular way that was not about sleep. He didn't defend it. "Yes," he said, "and that's the exposure." She looked at her own hands in her lap. "Not the violence, not the operations. The fact that you made a woman into a transaction." "Elena, I'm not angry at you." She looked up. "I want to be clear about that. I made the same choice you did. I agreed to it. I negotiated for my own position, and I have been living in this house and eating at your table and building a nursery for your child because I chose to." She stopped, breathed. "But Carver is right that it's a problem, and the problem isn't going away because you contain him or hit back. The problem is what it is." Damien was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" he said. It was not a rhetorical question. She could hear that. It was a genuine question from a man who had run out of his own answers sometime in the last 12 hours. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I don't think the answer is escalation." She looked at him. "And I don't think it's meeting with Carver. It's not." "So what is it?" He looked at the window. The gray light was strengthening slowly, the way Chicago mornings did in March, reluctantly, without warmth. "There's a third option," he said. "I've been working on it for 3 months. It was meant to be slower, more careful." He paused. Carver has accelerated the timeline. What's the option? He looked at her. His face was doing that thing again. The careful management, the shutters. And then, very slowly, he let some of it go. I restructure, he said, fully. Not the incremental dismantling I've been doing with the dangerous parts. A complete restructuring of how I operate, publicly. In a way that makes the leverage Carver has irrelevant, because the things he's threatening to expose become instead the story of a man who changed. He said it like a man testing the weight of something fragile. The arrangement, the child, the reason I made that decision. It becomes context for a public shift, not a liability. But only if the shift is real, and only if the timing is right, and only if… He stopped. Only if I agree to be part of it, Elena said. I was never going to ask you to do anything you didn't choose, he said. That's not… He stopped again. That's not something I'm willing to do anymore. She looked at him for a long time, at the cut along his jaw, at the untucked shirt and the absent jacket, and the eyes of a man who had been awake for more than 24 hours and was running on something beyond what sleep could fix. You've been planning this for 3 months, she said. Yes. Since when exactly? He held her gaze. Since January, he said. Since you told me the baby could hear my voice. The nursery was absolutely silent. Outside, Chicago was beginning to make its morning sounds. Distant traffic, the hum of a city negotiating with a new day. The child moved, a long, slow roll that Elena felt from one side of her body to the other. She pressed her hand flat against it. You should have told me, she said. I know. That's not something I can just… She stopped. The exhaustion was in her chest now, something heavy and complicated. I have been living in this house making decisions based on information you controlled, and you have been planning something that involves my life, my public story, my… She stopped again. You don't get to do that. Whatever else this arrangement is or isn't, you don't get to make plans about my life without telling me. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I'm not… He leaned forward in the chair, his elbows on his knees, his face close enough to the gray morning light that she could see how tired he actually was. I didn't tell you because I didn't know if I was going to go through with it. It required me to be a different kind of person than I have been, and I wasn't certain I was capable of that. He looked at her. I'm still not certain. She held his gaze. Then Marcus's voice came from the hallway, tight and fast. Damien, we have a problem. Damien was on his feet before the sentence ended. He was at the doorway in 3 steps, the exhaustion gone or buried in whatever place he kept it. Carver? He said. No. Marcus's voice was controlled in the way it got controlled when the information was bad enough to require control. It's Reyes. He's been talking. Elena watched Damien go completely still. How much? He said. Enough, Marcus said. The North Side account structure, the shell company in Delaware. Enough. The name Reyes meant nothing to Elena, but the way Damien's face changed when he heard it, not with anger, not with the cold management she'd come to recognize as his default, but with something that looked for just a second like grief. Reyes has been with me for 19 years, Damien said quietly. I know, Marcus said. He was at my father's funeral. He was the first man I brought into the operation when I took over. His voice had gone somewhere flat and unreachable. He stood in my corner every time someone tried to take what I built. I know, Marcus said again. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Damien turned back to look at her from the doorway, and his face had closed completely. All of it, every window, every crack she'd spent the last months watching widen. Stay in this room, he said. Damien, Elena. His voice was quiet, absolute. Please stay in this room. He was gone before she could answer. She sat in the rocking chair in the nursery, with the morning coming through the curtains, and her hand pressed to her stomach and the sound of footsteps receding down the hallway. And she understood that whatever the last 7 months had been, whatever careful, complicated, unnameable thing had been building between them, the world outside this room had just put its hands around it, and it was squeezing. She stayed in the room for 11 minutes. That was how long it took her to sit in the rocking chair with her hand on her stomach and her eyes on the curtains and the morning light thickening slowly on the floor, counting her own breaths, before she understood that staying in the room was not something she was actually capable of. She was not built for waiting in rooms while things happened without her. She got up carefully, one hand on the armrest, the other pressed low against the weight she carried, and she went to the door and opened it and stood in the hallway and listened. The house was different. She had learned its sounds the way you learn a language. Not consciously, not through study, but through immersion, through daily contact until the sounds became information. She knew the difference between the household running normally and the household running scared. She knew the weight of footsteps that were purposeful versus footsteps that were responding to something. What she heard now was neither. What she heard was the particular silence of people who had been told to be quiet. She went down the hallway toward the east staircase. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. Below, in the main corridor, she could see two men she didn't recognize positioned near the front entrance, standing, not moving, in the particular stillness of men who have been placed there and told to stay. Neither of them looked up at her. She went the other way. The private study on the second floor, Damien's actual working space, not the formal one she'd been permitted to clean, had its door closed. She could hear voices through it. She stood outside and did not let herself press her ear to the wood, because she was not going to do that, but she stood close enough that the voices resolved into words. Marcus first. Confirmed 2 separate transfers, both routed through the Delaware account before the structure was moved. Whoever he gave the information to has had it for at least 6 weeks. Then a voice she didn't know, older, controlled, with the specific flatness of a man delivering information he has already processed and moved past. The Delaware account was the keystone. Everything downstream from it is now potentially visible. The Cayman structure, the Wilmington holding, the 3 LLCs that managed the legitimate front operations. Then Damien, how long have you known it was Reyes? Silence. Then the older voice. 72 hours. The silence that followed was long enough that she started counting it. She got to 8 before Damien spoke again. You knew for 72 hours, he said, and you're telling me now. I needed to verify the chain completely before you knew for 72 hours. The flatness in Damien's voice was absolute. It was the flatness she had heard that first morning in the kitchen, the one that was worse than anger, the one that meant something had been decided. Get out of my house. Damien, the strategic priority right now is get out. Footsteps. The door opened. She stepped back, not fast enough. The man who came through the door was 60 or so, gray-suited, with the careful grooming of someone who has spent decades ensuring he looks like he belongs in whatever room he's in. He stopped when he saw her, looked at her stomach, looked at her face, made no expression at all, and somehow that was the most frightening thing about him. He walked past her without speaking. She stood in the hallway outside the open door. Inside the study, Marcus was at the desk looking at something on a laptop screen. Damien was standing at the window. His back was to her. She could see his shoulders, the set of them, the particular tension that she had learned to read like text. Damien, she said. He turned. His face was wrong. Not in the way of anger, not in the way of grief. Wrong in the way of a man who has just done the arithmetic on something and arrived at a number he cannot use. I told you to stay upstairs, he said. I know. She stepped into the room. Marcus looked at her and then looked away, which was its own kind of answer. Who was that man? Legal counsel. He knew about Reyes for 72 hours and didn't tell you. Yes. Why? Damien looked at her for a moment, then he looked at Marcus. A look passed between them, the compressed communication of men who have worked together for years, and Marcus closed the laptop and left the room, pulling the door most of the way shut behind him. Damien turned back to the window. Sit down, he said, please. She sat in the chair across from the desk. He stayed at the window. The restructuring plan I told you about, he said. The one I've been building for 3 months. It required certain legal groundwork, documentation that would support the public narrative, corporate restructuring filings, a paper trail that tells the right story in the right order. He paused. Hargrove, the man you saw, was managing that process. He's managed my legal affairs for 12 years. And he knew Reyes had given information to Carver and didn't tell you. He didn't tell me because the information Reyes gave Carver is also information that could implicate Hargrove himself in certain historic transactions. Damien's voice was flat, precise, emptied of everything except the facts. So he spent 72 hours deciding whether it was more valuable to warn me or to let the situation develop in a direction that might resolve his own exposure. Elena sat with that. He was deciding whether to let you fall. He was deciding whether my falling would solve his problem. And? And he decided this morning that it would not, so he came to tell me. Damien turned from the window. The problem is that in those 72 hours, Carver moved. Moved how? He looked at her. His eyes had something in them she had not seen before. Not fear, not grief, not anger. Something more fundamental than any of those. The look of a man standing in a landscape that has just changed shape under his feet. The restructuring plan required timing, he said. The public narrative had to come before the exposure, before Carver could make the arrangement and the account structures public. It had to be our story first, told in our terms, on our timeline. He paused. Carver filed last night with the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. He gave them the Delaware account structure, the transfer records, and he stopped. And a summary of our arrangement. The room was very quiet. The arrangement, she said. The contract. Yes. She absorbed it. The Federal Financial Crimes Task Force, which meant the account structures were now in federal hands, and her name, the contract, the transfer to her account, was also in federal hands. He used me, she said. Not bitterly, just factually, because that was the only way she knew how to say it. He used the arrangement as evidence of what he's characterizing as... Damien paused precisely. He's characterizing it as a scheme to manufacture a legitimate heir in order to transfer assets under the cover of a personal arrangement. She stared at him. He's saying you paid me to have a child so you could hide money. That is what he's saying, yes. And the federal task force will investigate, which means every account connected to mine, every structure, every front operation gets scrutiny I cannot currently afford. He came away from the window and sat in the chair behind the desk that was always empty except for a legal pad and a pen. He sat in it the way a man sits when he is done managing how he looks. And your account, Elena, the transfer to your account, it's part of the filing. The child moved, a long, slow movement, flank to flank, the kind that had started happening in the last 2 weeks, bigger now, less like fluttering and more like something asserting its presence with actual weight. She pressed her hand against it. How bad, she said. Bad. How bad, Damien? He looked at her. The front operations, the legitimate businesses, the restaurants, the real estate holdings, those are defensible. They have clean documentation, clean books, years of legitimate revenue. Those survive scrutiny. He paused. The account structures Reyes gave them access to are not those. What are they? They are 20 years of methodology, he said, of taking money from operations that don't exist on paper and making it exist, turning it into something real and defensible. He held her gaze. They are the accounting of everything I have ever done. She understood then. Not all of it, not the legal architecture, not the specific exposure, but the shape of it, the size of it. They have everything, she said. Enough, he said. They have enough. And the restructuring plan is not executable now, not on any timeline that matters. He set his hands flat on the desk. She could see them, the hands that had been shaking outside the hospital room she hadn't reached yet, the hands that held a phone while men died and empires moved, the hands that had once been placed very briefly, very carefully, on the outside of a nursery doorframe. The plan required operating from a position of voluntary disclosure, me choosing to restructure, me defining the narrative. What Carver did last night turns it into response, defense. And defense is not... He stopped. It changes everything about how it reads. What do you need to do? I need to... He stopped again. She could see him calculating, running scenarios, doing in real time what she had watched him do a dozen times across the last months. The chess player mind, the man who always had a next move. But the calculation was taking longer than it should, and his face had something in it she'd never seen there before. I don't know, he said. The words sat in the room. Damien Voss, who had not said those words to another person in decades, who had built an empire on the particular confidence of a man who always knew. She looked at him across the desk. When did Reyes start? She said. How far back does this go? Damien's jaw tightened. I don't know yet. Marcus is tracing it. Do you have a guess? My guess is 18 months, maybe longer. He looked at his hands on the desk. Carver has been building this for a long time. Reyes didn't just flip, he was recruited, carefully, systematically. A pause. 19 years. The words sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. She thought about what he'd said outside the nursery door. He stood in my corner every time someone tried to take what I built. The grief she'd heard in his voice underneath the control. The kind of grief that doesn't have a name because the relationship it belongs to doesn't have a name. Did you see it? She said. Any of it? No. I looked, Elena. After the Rourke situation, I audited. I had Marcus go through every person in the inner circle. Reyes, he stopped. Reyes was so clean that Marcus flagged 2 other people on the same review and cleared Reyes without a second look. Because you trusted him. Because 19 years, because his jaw worked. Because there are people you don't audit deeply, because to audit them would be to admit that no one is actually safe. And if no one is safe, then nothing you've built means anything. She sat very still. The morning light had moved across the floor while they'd been talking, shortening, sharpening. It was nearly 8 o'clock. Marcus, she said, you trust Marcus? Yes. Still, after Marcus came to me himself, within an hour of confirming the Reyes information. Damien looked up at her. He didn't wait. He didn't calculate. He walked into my office and he told me. A pause. That's the difference. She nodded slowly. Then the door opened. Marcus came in with a laptop under his arm and an expression on his face that had gone past controlled into something that was just flat. The practiced blankness of a man carrying something he doesn't want to carry. Tell me, Damien said. Marcus set the laptop on the desk, turned it to face Damien. She couldn't see the screen from where she sat, but she watched Damien's face as he read. The change was subtle, the kind of thing she would have missed 6 months ago, before she'd learned his face the way she'd learned this house's sounds. His eyes stilled. The slight movement they always had, the constant small shifts of a thinking, processing mind, just stopped. When was this taken? He said. 3 weeks ago, Marcus said, at the clinic on Maple, Dr. Rice's office. The clinic on Maple was where Elena went for her prenatal appointments. Dr. Rice was her obstetrician. She sat forward. What is that? Damien looked up at her. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face. The expression of a man who does not know how to deliver something, and knows there is no version in which delivery is anything other than bad. He turned the laptop. She looked at the screen. It was a photograph, taken from outside through a window with a telephoto lens set, grainy but clear enough. It showed a woman walking out of a medical building. The woman was her. She could see her coat, the green one she wore on appointment days. She could see the shape of her, 7 months along, unmistakable. And she could see the man walking beside her. A man she didn't recognize at first because he was in a coat she hadn't seen him wear, and the angle was partial. But she looked at the jaw, the height, the particular way he held his shoulders. The man in the photograph was Hargrove, the lawyer. He was holding a door for her. He was at an appointment she had no memory of him attending. She looked up at Damien. I've never met that man before today. I know, Damien said. He was never at any of my appointments. I've never had a conversation with him. I know. Then how? The photograph isn't real, Marcus said quietly. It's been constructed. Composite imaging. Her extracted from an authentic photo, placed into a different background with Hargrove added. He paused. It's very good. It would pass a standard review. She stared at it. Why? Because Carver's filing to the federal task force is not just the account structures, Damien said. His voice was back to the controlled flatness, but it cost him something now. She could hear that it cost him. He has also filed a supplementary allegation that the arrangement between you and me was not made in private but was brokered through legal counsel. He paused. Specifically, that Hargrove facilitated the arrangement as part of a broader scheme to conceal assets by distributing them through a personal relationship that would be difficult to scrutinize. She understood it then, the full architecture of it. He's saying Hargrove set us up, she said, as a financial scheme. He's saying we are all 3 complicit in a coordinated financial fraud, Damien said, which means the transfer to your account is not a private arrangement. It becomes, in the federal filing, evidence of fraud proceeds. The word proceeds hit her somewhere in the chest. The money. The transfer that had cleared, that sat in an account in her name, that was the reason she had said yes in the first place. The number that was supposed to end one life and start another. They can freeze it, she said. They already have, Marcus said. She sat very still. Everything she had negotiated, every term she had fought for in that office, the things she had written on a piece of paper and put in her coat pocket. The money that was not about the money, but about the freedom, the ability to choose, the ability to be present for this child without being dependent on Damien's continued goodwill. All of it, frozen. When? She said. This morning. Probably within the last 2 hours. Marcus looked at his phone. The bank will have flagged it and sent you a notification. She looked at her own phone. She had not checked it since 3 in the morning. She checked it now. There were 4 notifications. She opened the first one. She read it, set the phone face down on her knee. Elena, Damien started. I need a minute. She said it quietly. Not with anger. Not with anything that could be named yet. Please. I was quiet. She sat with the phone face down on her knee and her hand on her stomach and the morning light sharp and cold across the floor of a room that had never been hers. In a house that had never been hers, carrying a child she had agreed to carry for money. That now, this morning, did not exist in any form she could access. The child moved. She pressed her hand flat and felt it, the weight of it, the reality of it. The thing that was not abstract, was not a contract, was not a transaction, was not a financial instrument, was not leverage, was not anything that any of these men in any of these rooms had ever had a word for. A person. Becoming a person. Inside her. She looked up at Damien. He was watching her with the look she had begun to recognize as his closest thing to helpless. The look of a man who has exhausted his own systems and has arrived somewhere he has no map for. What happens to the baby? She said. In the federal investigation, what happens? Nothing, he said immediately. The child is not, don't tell me nothing. Tell me what actually happens. He held her gaze. If the investigation concludes that the arrangement was fraudulent, the terms of the arrangement are voided, which means the legal framework we established for your role in the child's life. He stopped. Is also voided, she said. It would require, is it voided, Damien? In the current structure, yes. She nodded slowly. She could feel the careful, deliberate quality of her own nodding, the way she was managing her body's responses, the way she had learned to do since she was a child watching her mother at the kitchen table. The management of reaction, the containment of things that would otherwise break you open in public. So Carver's play, she said, is not just your empire, it's this house. It's me. It's the arrangement that gives me any standing in this child's life. Her voice remained steady. She was distantly impressed by it. He burns everything, your operations, your freedom, my money, and my ability to be present for my own child. And you have no idea how to stop it. I'm working on, do you have a move? She leaned forward. Not a plan, not a framework, a move. Right now, this morning, do you have one? The silence was her answer. Then I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I need you to tell me the truth. Not the managed version, not the version that protects me from things you think I can't handle. She looked at him. Who knew about the arrangement when it was made? Who did you tell? No one. Marcus? The general. Yes. The specifics? Hargrove? Damien paused. That pause was the answer. He drew up the initial contract framework, Damien said. The first version, before you renegotiated the terms. He knows everything. He knows the structure of the original arrangement, not the renegotiated terms. Those were handled through a different, he knows enough. She sat back, which means Carver has someone who can speak to the arrangement from the inside, someone with legal knowledge of how it was constructed. She looked at the laptop, still open on the desk between them. Hargrove isn't a victim in Carver's narrative. He's a source. Damien stared at her. She watched the moment of it hit him, the adjustment, the reorientation, the rapid reconstruction of a scenario he had been reading incorrectly. He came here this morning, Damien said slowly. To see how much you knew, she said, and to see if you'd already connected him to Carver. And when he saw that you hadn't, He played the loyal counsel delivering bad news. Damien's voice had gone to somewhere very quiet and very cold. So I would focus on Rhea. So I would look east instead of at the man who just left your house, she said. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Damien looked at Marcus. Find him. Marcus was already on his phone, already moving to the door. Damien. She said his name and he stopped. He always stopped. She had noticed that, even now, even in the middle of whatever this was becoming. He's not going to wait for you to find him. If he's been working with Carver and he just realized you're starting to connect it, he's already... Her phone buzzed on her knee. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Same prefix as the night before. She held it up so Damien could see. He crossed the room in 4 steps and took the phone from her hand, not roughly, but completely, and answered it and put it on speaker. Mr. Voss, said Gideon Carver's voice, still smooth, still unhurried, the voice of a man who has been waiting for this exact moment and has found it exactly where he left it. I see the morning has been educational. Where is Hargrove? Damien said. Safe, cooperative, significantly more comfortable than you are right now. A pause. I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty at this point. What I built against you is complete. The federal filing, the account documentation, the source material. It doesn't require anything else from me. It's already in motion. Another pause. What I'm offering you now is a choice about how the next part of this goes. You have nothing to offer me. I have one thing, Carver said. The filing includes a supplementary allegation about Miss Marlowe's knowing participation in the scheme. That allegation can be withdrawn. The account freeze on her personal funds can be resolved in a way that leaves her clean, financially and legally. The child's situation, the legitimacy of her role, all of that can be documented in a way that survives what's coming to you. A pause. Or it can be left in, as is, and whatever happens to you happens to her. Elena sat very still. What do you want? Damien said. The Millbrook properties, Carver said. The 3 commercial buildings on the north side and the warehouse cluster in Bridgeport. Those transfer to a holding company I designate within 72 hours with clean documentation and no encumbrances. Those properties are the foundation of the legitimate operation. If I transfer them, you lose the legitimate operation. Yes. Carver's voice remained pleasant. But Miss Marlowe walks away clean. The child's situation is protected, and you still have the personal freedom to rebuild from whatever the federal investigation leaves you. A pause. Which is not nothing, Mr. Voss. Many men have started from less. The call was silent for a long moment. Then Damien looked at Elena. He looked at her the way he had looked at no one in 41 years. Not a calculation, not a management of her response, not the contained, careful look of a man controlling a situation. Just her, looking at her. And she understood in that moment that he was not going to make this decision. He was waiting for her to make it. She took the phone from his hand. Mr. Carver, she said. A brief pause. Genuine surprise, she thought, the first break in his composure. Miss Marlowe, I'm going to decline your offer, she said. Damien's hand moved toward the phone. She stepped back. The properties are not going to be transferred, and whatever you've built against us, against all of us, including me, you're going to have to use it. Miss Marlowe, Carver's voice had shed some of its smoothness. You understand what you're... I understand completely, she said. The difference between you and me is that I have nothing left to lose that I haven't already decided I'm willing to lose. She looked at Damien while she said it. You built this entire thing on leverage, on the assumption that we would protect what we had by giving you what you wanted. She paused. You miscalculated what we're actually protecting. She ended the call. The room was absolutely silent. Damien looked at her with an expression that she had no precedent for, in his face or anyone else's. Elena, he said, if they proceed with the full filing, then we deal with it, she said. Fully, openly. She held his gaze. You said you needed to restructure. You said you needed to be a different kind of person. You said the plan required voluntary disclosure and you needed to define the narrative. She felt the child move. One strong, decisive movement, like punctuation. So we define it, now, not the version Carver is giving them. Ours. The legal exposure. I know the legal exposure. She set the phone on the desk. I am standing in it with you, which means I get to decide what it's worth. She looked at him. Is there enough of the legitimate operation left to build on? After everything Carver has access to, is there something real underneath it? He looked at her for a long time. Yes, he said quietly. The front operations are real. The restaurants, the real estate portfolio outside the flagged structures, the import business I've been legitimizing for 3 years. Then that's what we start with, she said. And we go to the federal task force before they come to us. She picked up her phone again. And you tell me everything, every detail, every structure, every decision, no managed version. Elena? All of it, she said, starting now. Outside the study window, Chicago was fully awake, gray and cold and indifferent in the particular way of large cities, the way that was not cruelty but simply scale, the sheer size of a world that did not organize itself around any one person's crisis. Damien Voss stood in the middle of his own demolished empire, 41 years old, with a federal investigation in motion and a 19-year friendship in ruins and a legal structure that had taken 2 decades to build, now in the hands of a man he'd underestimated. He looked at the woman standing across from him, 7 months pregnant, exhausted, account frozen, every term she'd negotiated for herself now legally contested, standing in the wreckage of his world like it was the only place she'd decided to be. He picked up his phone and called the one attorney whose name wasn't in any of Carver's files, a woman in a downtown firm who owed Damien a debt of a different and entirely uncomplicated kind, and said 4 words. We need to talk. And in the hallway outside, unheard by either of them, a door closed. The sound of Marcus Hale ending a call of his own, a call to a number that had not been in Damien's contact list, a call that had lasted 40 seconds, a call whose content would not surface until it was already too late to change what it had set in motion. The attorney's name was Diane Cho, and she arrived at the estate 40 minutes after Damien's call, which told Elena something about the nature of the debt she was owed. She was 50, compact, with the kind of face that had stopped performing warmth somewhere around the 2nd decade of criminal defense work, and now simply performed precision. She came in with a briefcase and no assistant and sat down at the dining room table and looked at Damien and said, Talk. All of it. I need the full architecture before I can tell you what's salvageable. Damien talked. Elena sat across the table and listened, and for the first time she heard it without the managed version, without the careful omissions, without the parts he'd decided she didn't need. She heard 20 years of it, the structure of it, the way money moved through shells and emerged clean on the other side, the operations that didn't exist on paper and the ones that did, and the careful membrane between them that Reyes had apparently been perforating for 18 months, handing Carver one thread at a time, slowly and patiently, the way you dismantle something you've studied long enough to understand completely. She listened, and she did not flinch, and she did not look away. Diane Cho took notes in a handwriting so compressed it was nearly unreadable, and asked questions that were surgical and short and allowed for no evasion. When Damien tried to frame something, she said, Don't frame it, tell me what happened. When he stopped on a particular year's transactions, she said, Keep going, I'll tell you what matters. At the 90-minute mark, Diane set down her pen. The exposure is significant, she said. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. The account structures Reyes compromised are going to be difficult to defend as anything other than what they are. She paused. The question is not whether there is exposure. The question is the sequence. If you go to the task force before they build a complete case, and right now they have Carver's filing, but they don't have a full independent evidentiary picture, you have leverage. Not much, but some. Cooperation, Damien said. Selective cooperation. You give them what they can eventually get anyway, and you give it in a way that implicates the people who actually moved against you. Carver, Hargrove, Reyes. You frame it as a man who built something imperfectly and was then targeted by people who used that imperfection as a weapon. She looked at Elena. And the arrangement, the contract, the transfer, Miss Marlowe's situation, that becomes the most important part of the human narrative. How? Elena said. Because right now Carver has characterized it as a scheme, a financial instrument. Diane looked at her directly. The counter-narrative is the reality. A man who made a transactional decision and in the process of it was changed by it. A woman who negotiated from a position of principle and held to it. She paused. That story is not a legal argument. It's context. Juries and investigators are human beings. Context matters. You're saying we tell the truth, Elena said. I'm saying you tell a version of the truth that is complete and documented and delivered on your timeline before Carver's version becomes the only one available. Diane picked up her pen again. Which means we move today, not tomorrow. Today. Elena looked at Damien. He was looking at the table. The set of his jaw was the particular set of a man doing something difficult in his own chest. Some rearrangement of weight that didn't show on the outside but cost him something to accomplish. He looked up. Do it, he said. Marcus was not in the house. She noticed it at 10:30 when she went to find him to ask about the gate logs from the night before, a detail Diane had needed, something Marcus would have had. She asked one of the household staff, and the man looked at her with the careful blankness that meant he was deciding how much to say. He went out, the man said, about an hour ago. Did he say where? No. She went back to the dining room and pulled Damien aside, away from Diane, and the documents spread across the table. Marcus isn't here, she said quietly. Damien looked at her. He's probably following up on, he went out an hour ago without telling anyone where. She held his gaze. After a phone call in the hallway outside your study, I heard the door. She watched the calculation move through his face, watched it arrive somewhere. What time was the call? He said. Right after I ended Carver's call. Maybe 5 minutes after. Damien was already pulling out his own phone. He dialed. Held it to his ear. She watched his face. He lowered the phone. Voicemail. They stood in the hallway outside the dining room, and neither of them said what they were thinking, because saying it out loud was a door that only opened one way. Then Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression changed in a way she had learned to read, the specific quality of an expression he was suppressing. He answered, Marcus. She could hear Marcus's voice from where she stood, compressed, fast, with the particular tension of a man speaking carefully because he was not alone. I need you to listen, Marcus said. Don't interrupt. I have about 90 seconds. Go. Carver has Hargrove in a building on West Randolph. Not a public location, a private floor above a restaurant he controls. Hargrove has been there since this morning. He didn't run Damien. He's cooperating willingly because Carver promised him immunity from the federal filing, and he's stupid enough to believe it. A pause. The federal task force contact that Carver used to file is an agent named Doyle, Carl Doyle. He has a relationship with Carver that goes back 4 years that does not appear in any official record. The filing did not go through standard channels. It was directed specifically to Doyle and has not yet been formally entered into the system. Damien was very still. It hasn't been entered. Carver needs one more thing before he enters it. He needs the Millbrook properties transferred. He told Hargrove that once the transfer happens, he enters the filing and it becomes federal record. Until then, it's a threat, Damien said, not a weapon. It becomes a weapon in... Marcus paused. The quality of the pause changed. When he came back, his voice was lower. I have to go. Damien. Hargrove knows the contact Carver used. He has the documentation of the Doyle relationship. He doesn't know that's valuable because he doesn't know about the filing timing. If you can get to him before Carver realizes what you know. The call ended. The hallway was quiet. Elena looked at Damien. His jaw was tight and his eyes were moving through something internal, rapid, and precise. The chess player mind running forward through sequences she couldn't follow. Marcus is with Carver, she said. He went to find out what Carver had, Damien said. On his own, without telling me. He looked at her. Because if he told me, I would have told him not to go. Why? Because if Carver figures out that Marcus is gathering information and not just... He stopped. If Carver realizes Marcus isn't there to negotiate, Marcus is not in a safe position. The words landed with a weight she felt in her chest. How long do we have? She said. The Millbrook transfer deadline he gave me was 72 hours. That was this morning. He was already moving down the hallway, which means Carver expects to spend today applying pressure and get compliance by tomorrow night. And instead you're going to West Randolph. He stopped, turned. You're going to stay here. I know, she said, but you're going to West Randolph. He held her gaze. Yes. And you're going to get Marcus out. Yes. She looked at him. 7 months pregnant, standing in the hallway of a house under legal siege, with a frozen bank account and a federal investigation in motion, and the man she had spent 7 months learning how to trust about to walk out the door into something that had no guaranteed shape. "Come back," she said. Again. The same word she'd said in February. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he nodded once, the specific nod of a man making a commitment, and was gone. Wolch. The building on West Randolph was 4 stories, the bottom 2 a restaurant that operated legitimately, the top 2 a private space that did not appear in any business registration connected to Gideon Carver's name. Damien knew it. He had known about the building for 2 years, had tracked its acquisition through 3 shell fronts, had filed it away as information that might eventually be useful. He had not anticipated that the use would be this. He came with 2 men. Not a show of force, because a show of force at a public address on West Randolph at 11 in the morning was not something he could sustain today, not with a federal filing potentially in motion. He came with 2 men who knew how to be invisible and how to move in a way that didn't create a record. He went through the restaurant, told the hostess he had a private meeting upstairs, walked through the dining room like he owned the building, because in Damien Voss's experience, the most reliable way to move through a space unchallenged was to behave as if the challenge itself was the absurd option. The staircase in the back was narrow and unlit. He took it. The 3rd floor had 2 men in the corridor. He recognized neither of them, which meant Carver had brought in external personnel, which meant he was being careful. The 2 men looked at him and started to move, and Damien's 2 men were already there. Not with weapons, not with violence, with the particular physical positioning of people who have trained for exactly this geometry. "I'm here to see Carver," Damien said. "He can speak to me here, or I can make enough noise on the way out that this address becomes a record." One of Carver's men looked at the other. A beat. Then one of them knocked on the door behind him. The room was a conference space, clean and impersonal in the way of rooms that serve one purpose and are not meant to be remembered. Carver was at the head of the table. He looked, in person, like someone had taken the smooth telephone voice and packaged it into a 60-year-old body. Silver-haired, well-dressed, with eyes that did their work without advertising it. Hargrove was at the side of the table. He looked worse than he had at the estate that morning. The grooming slightly disheveled, the carefully maintained composure of a man who had calculated wrong and was beginning to understand the dimensions of that error. Marcus was standing near the window. He was fine, physically, visibly fine. But the angle of his posture told Damien something about the last hour that words would fill in later. Carver looked at Damien and said, "This is earlier than I expected." "I want Hargrove," Damien said. "And I want Marcus. And then I want to have a real conversation." "A real conversation," Carver leaned back. "You mean you've reconsidered the transfer?" "I mean, I know about Doyle," Damien said. The room changed. Subtle. A shift in the air, the slight alteration in how Carver was holding his own stillness. "Carl Doyle," Damien said. "The task force contact you've been managing for 4 years. The one who received your filing off-channel this morning and has not yet formally entered it into the federal system." He held Carver's gaze. "Which means your weapon isn't loaded yet." Carver looked at Hargrove. Hargrove's face had gone the color of old paper. "You told him," Carver said. His voice had shed the pleasantness. Beneath it was something efficient and cold. The actual voice. The one the smooth version had been designed to cover. "I didn't," Hargrove started. "You told him about Doyle." "I didn't know that he—" Hargrove stood up. The movement was wrong. Too fast. Uncontrolled. The movement of a man whose internal calculation had just collapsed entirely. "I didn't know the call was—" "Sit down," Carver said. Hargrove sat down. Carver looked back at Damien. The pleasantness was gone, but the control was intact. The control of a man who has prepared for multiple scenarios and is now simply selecting the one that applies. "Knowing about Doyle doesn't change your situation," Carver said. "It changes your timeline. You know you have a window, but the window closes the moment I decide to have Doyle enter the filing regardless of the transfer, and that is a decision I can make right now." He looked at Damien. "So we're back to the same question. What are you willing to give me to make this go away?" "Nothing," Damien said. "Then Marcus stays." "Marcus is not detained. You're not in a position to detain anyone on West Randolph at 11 in the morning." Damien looked at his right hand. Marcus, come here. Marcus moved away from the window. Carver's men at the door shifted, and Damien's men shifted with them, and the room held its breath on a hair trigger for 3 full seconds. Then Carver held up one hand. His men stopped. Marcus crossed the room and stood beside Damien. You want to trade, Carver said. Not a question. The reading of a position. Not the properties. Something else. Doyle, Damien said. The documentation of the relationship. The chain of communication between you and him over 4 years. The off-channel filing process. All of it. Carver's expression did not change, but something behind it did. The slight recalibration of a man who has just been presented with a variable he underweighted. And in exchange. I don't touch Doyle directly, Damien said. I don't go near the federal process. I don't use what I have about your relationship with him to redirect the investigation. He paused. What I do instead is complete the restructuring I've already begun. Legitimately. Through Diane Cho's office, with full voluntary disclosure of the account structures, framed as a cooperative engagement. The front operations survive. The flagged structures are disclosed and addressed. The narrative is mine. And I get nothing. You get Hargrove, Damien said. Clean. Whatever arrangement you've made with him, whatever he's given you, I don't contest it and I don't pursue it. He leaves here as your asset, not mine. He looked at Hargrove, who was staring at the table. He was never mine. Not really. The room was quiet. Carver looked at Damien for a long time. The assessment was thorough and unhurried. The look of a man who does not make decisions based on anything other than complete evaluation. You understand, Carver said, that this is not an end. You walk out of here, you do your restructuring, you survive this, and I am still here. In this city, in this business. I understand that, Damien said, and you're comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with what I can manage, Damien said, and what I can't manage, I leave alone. Carver looked at him for another long moment. Then he said, I'll have the Doyle documentation sent to an address you designate within 4 hours. Marcus will give you the address and the restructuring timeline. 30 days, Damien said. Diane Cho's office, documented and filed. Carver nodded once. The nod of a man closing a ledger entry. Damien turned to leave. Mr. Voss, Carver's voice behind him. Still smooth. Back to the surface version. The woman, the arrangement. I want you to understand the supplementary allegation against her. That was leverage, not intention. A pause. She struck me on the phone this morning as someone who doesn't deserve to be inside this. Damien did not turn around. She didn't deserve to be inside any of it, he said. That's on me. He walked out. They were on the street outside before Marcus said anything. How did you know I'd get the Doyle information? Marcus said. When you came in there, you didn't know for certain. No, Damien said. You bluffed. I made an educated assessment. You walked into a room with Carver on incomplete information. Yes. Damien stopped on the sidewalk and looked at Marcus. You went into that building alone and didn't tell me. Marcus was quiet. 11 years, Damien said. You've been in my corner for 11 years, and this morning you went to find out what Carver had without telling me because you knew I'd stop you, and you decided the information was worth the risk. He held Marcus's gaze. That was either the most loyal thing you've ever done for me or the most reckless. Both, Marcus said. Both, Damien agreed. They stood on West Randolph while Chicago moved around them. Indifferent, continuous, the city going about its business in the cold March air, with no particular acknowledgement of the men on its sidewalks or the weight of what was being carried. Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. The estate. He answered. It was the housekeeper, her voice tight and carefully controlled in the way of someone delivering information that needs to arrive complete before panic sets in. Mr. Voss, Miss Marlowe. His chest tightened. What? She's asking for the car. She says she needs to go to the clinic. She says it's not an emergency, but she wants to. How long ago did she ask? 10 minutes. We didn't know if we should. He was already moving toward the car. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her not to go anywhere. I'll be there in. He looked at Marcus, who was already ahead of him, already at the car door. 15 minutes. She says it's not an emergency, the housekeeper said again, the repetition of someone trying to manage their own fear by repeating the reassurance. Tell her I'm coming, he said. Well, She was in the front hallway when he got there, coat on, a bag over one shoulder, and she looked at him when he came through the door, with the particular expression of someone who has been managing their own adrenaline for the last 20 minutes and is very relieved to have something to hand it off to. "It's probably nothing," she said immediately. "Tightening. It could be early contractions, or it could be Braxton Hicks, and I'm at 32 weeks, so either way, Dr. Rice said to come in if I felt—" "Get in the car," he said. "I'm not saying it's—" "Elena." He crossed the hallway to where she was standing and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up at him. His voice was controlled, but his face was not, and she could see it, the thing underneath, the thing that had been building for 7 months and was now too large for the container he'd built for it. "Get in the car." She got in the car. He drove. Not fast enough to be reckless, fast enough to be honest about what was happening inside his chest. Marcus stayed at the estate. It was just them, in the car, in the Chicago midday traffic, with the city moving around them. She talked to Dr. Rice's office on her phone. He listened to her voice, calm, precise, giving information, and focused on the road and the gap between where they were and where they needed to be. "She said come in," Elena told him. "Not to the ER. To the office. If it was an emergency, she'd say the ER. I know. You're driving like it's the ER. I'm driving like I want to get there." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How did it go? West Randolph." "It's handled." "Marcus?" "Fine." "The filing?" "Not entered. Doyle documentation is coming. Diane Cho can use it to neutralize the off-channel issue, and the filing dies before it becomes federal record." He changed lanes. "The restructuring goes forward on our timeline. Voluntary. Through proper channels." She turned to look at him. He could feel her looking at him. "You did it," she said. "We have 30 days of very complicated legal work and a public narrative to build, and a restructuring that will cost me," he paused, "a significant part of what I've spent 20 years building. But you did it." He didn't answer. Not because the answer was no. They pulled up to the clinic on Maple. He parked and they went in, and the woman at the front desk recognized Elena and took them back immediately, which was its own kind of signal about the relationship the staff had with her over the last months. Dr. Rice came in within 5 minutes. She was calm and efficient, and she looked at Elena and then at Damien and said, "Let me examine her. You can stay or wait. Your call." He stayed. He stood at the side of the room and watched the examination with his hands very still at his sides, and his breathing controlled in the way it had been controlled for 20 years of situations that required control. And he understood, watching Elena's face and Dr. Rice's hands, and the monitor that was showing him the sound of a heartbeat, rapid, strong, foreign, and the most significant sound he had ever heard, that he had been afraid before. He had been afraid in the building on West Randolph. He had been afraid at 3 in the morning when he'd come back with blood on his shirt and a cut on his jaw. He had been afraid in February when he'd had to tell her that her money was frozen and her legal standing had been built on ground that someone else had put a match to. Those fears had been manageable. They had been fears with structures, with plans, with next moves. This was different. This was 32 weeks and tightening contractions and a heartbeat on a monitor, and there was no next move he could call that would manage this. There was no force he could meet with greater force. There was no architecture of control that applied to whatever was happening in that room. Dr. Rice looked up from the monitor. "Braxton Hicks," she said. "Not labor. The baby is fine. Heartbeat is strong. Position is good." She looked at Elena. "But I want to talk to you about the stress markers I'm seeing. Your blood pressure is elevated from your last visit, and given everything—" She paused, with the particular pause of a physician who is aware she is in a room with things she doesn't know the shape of. "I'd like to see you reduce physical and emotional stress significantly for the next several weeks." Elena looked at the ceiling briefly. The look of a woman receiving advice that is accurate and impractical simultaneously. "I understand," she said. "I mean it, Elena. 32 weeks is not a point where we want surprises." "I understand," she said again, and then, without looking at him, without making it a gesture or a statement, "We both understand." Dr. Rice nodded, left them alone. The room was quiet except for the monitor, which was still running, the heartbeat still audible, rapid and strong and entirely itself, indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 18 hours, continuing without reference to federal filings or account structures or Men on West Randolph, or 20 years of decisions made in the dark. Damien looked at the monitor. He looked at it the way he had looked at almost nothing in his life. Without calculation, without the next move, without anything except the fact of it. "Come here," Elena said. He looked at her. She was watching him from the examination table with the calm, exhausted eyes of a woman who has been through a great deal in one morning and is not done yet. He crossed the room and stood next to her. She took his hand. Not gently, practically. The way she did everything, reaching out and taking it the way you take something that belongs in your hand. And she placed it flat against her stomach. He felt it immediately. The movement, not the restless night movement she'd described, not the assertive pressure she'd placed his attention on before, something different, something slower and deliberate, the movement of something very small and very certain pressing back against the contact. He stood very still. His hand pressed back. The heartbeat on the monitor kept its pace, steady and unimpressed, doing the only thing it knew how to do. He looked at Elena. She was watching his face. He didn't manage his face. He let her see it, all of it, the thing that had been building since the nursery in January, and the rocking chair and the voice that could carry to an unborn child, and the man he was trying and failing and trying again to become. 32 weeks, she said quietly. 8 more, he said. His voice came out rough. He didn't fix it. 8 more, she agreed. Outside the clinic window, Chicago kept going, loud and gray and indifferent. Inside the room, the heartbeat continued its count. His hand stayed flat against her, and the child moved again, slow, certain, pushing back against his palm as if it already knew the weight of the hand it was pushing against and had already decided something about it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Diane Cho. He knew without looking. He did not reach for it. "It's probably Diane," Elena said. "Probably. You should answer it." "In a minute," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them, against his hand, the movement slowed and stilled. The child settling, the way children settle when something shifts around them. The animal instinct of a creature not yet born, already reading the quality of the hands on the outside. His phone buzzed again. He reached into his pocket with his other hand and sent the call to voicemail. Elena's mouth did something that was not quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. The slight easing of her face that he had learned over 7 months was the most honest expression she had. "The restructuring," she said. 30 days. 30 days? And the narrative. "Hours," he said, "on our timeline. Full truth. As close to it as Diane will allow." He held her gaze. "Which is closer than I've ever gone." She nodded slowly. Outside the window, a cloud shifted, and for a moment the March light came through the glass, thin, Chicago pale, the kind of light that doesn't commit to warmth, but doesn't pretend to be something else either. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Before we go back. Before everything that's about to happen." He waited. "When Carver called me at 3 this morning," she said, "he said he had information about what you were planning that you hadn't told me. And Marcus told me it was a manipulation, and I knew it was a manipulation." She looked at him. "But I also knew there was something in it, not because Carver was honest, because I'd felt it, the thing you were holding back, the plan that existed before you told me about it." He said nothing. "I'm not angry," she said. "I told you that this morning, and I meant it, but I need you to understand something about the next 8 weeks, and the 8 months after that, and whatever this becomes." She held his gaze without blinking. "I don't need to be protected from information. I don't need the managed version. I have been managing my own survival since I was 17 years old, and I am very good at it. And the one thing that will make this—" She stopped. "The one thing that will make whatever this is impossible is if you decide that protecting me means keeping me in a room while the world decides things about my life." His hand was still against her stomach. "I know," he said. "Say it like you mean it." "No more managed versions," he said. "No more plans that involve your life that I build without you." He held her gaze. "I mean it." She looked at him for a long moment, the quiet assessment of a woman who has learned to read the difference between what people say and what they've actually decided. Then she nodded once. "Okay." She reached up and pressed her hand over his, the one still flat against her stomach. And the monitor kept its steady count, and somewhere across the city, Diane Cho was leaving a second voicemail, and Marcus was at the estate managing whatever came next through the gate. And the 30 days of restructuring and disclosure and public narrative were waiting like a weight on the other side of a door. But in that room, for that moment, none of it had arrived yet. His phone buzzed a third time. This time he looked at the screen. Not Diane, not Marcus. A number he didn't recognize, a Chicago area code. And below it, a text that had come in simultaneously, 4 words from the same number, 4 words that landed in his chest like something physical. She knows about Elena. He stared at the screen. Elena felt the change in his hand. What is it? He turned the phone so she could see. She read it. Her face went very still. Who sent that? She said. He was already trying to call the number back. Nothing. Disconnected. Already dead. He lowered the phone. Elena was looking at him with the particular stillness of someone who has just realized that the door they thought was closed has been open the entire time. And on the other side of it is something that has been watching, waiting, patient, in a way that none of the men they'd been dealing with, not Carver, not Reyes, not Hargrove, had ever needed to be. She, Elena said, not they, not he. She looked at him. Who is she, Damien? He looked at the dead number on his screen. He looked at Elena, and for the first time since she had known him, since the office on the 43rd floor and the kitchen in the early morning and the nursery doorway and the leather chair and every conversation that had cracked something open between them, Damien Voss looked genuinely, completely afraid. Her name was Sylvia Voss. Damien said it in the car on the way back to the estate, quietly, looking at the road. The way you say something you've been carrying so long that the saying of it feels like setting down a weight you've forgotten the shape of. Elena sat in the passenger seat and listened. Sylvia Voss was 53 years old. She had been Damien's father's second wife, not his mother, who had died when Damien was 3, but the woman who had come after, who had arrived in the house when Damien was 9 and had spent 2 years making him understand, through the specific cruelty available to adults who dislike children they've inherited, that he was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be raised. When Damien's father died, Sylvia had contested the estate. She had lost. Damien had been 22, already inside the operation his father had built, already beginning the slow work of restructuring it into something that would survive longer than fear could hold it together. He had won the legal fight, and he had paid her out, and he had not seen her in 19 years. She's been watching, Elena said. She's always watched, he said, from a distance. I knew she tracked the operation. I had her monitored for years and eventually stopped because she never moved. He paused. I stopped because I thought she'd accepted it. She was waiting, Elena said. She was waiting, he agreed. For what? For something she could use that wasn't the operation. He kept his eyes on the road. The operation, she couldn't touch. I'd built it past anything she had legal standing to contest. But if there was a child, a legitimate heir, she could contest standing in the estate. She could argue that the arrangement was constructed to exclude prior claims. He stopped. She hired Reyes. Elena turned to look at him. Reyes didn't flip to Carver first, Damien said. He flipped to Sylvia 18 months ago. She's the one who built the relationship with Carver, used Reyes to give Carver the account information in exchange for Carver's network, his federal contact, his capacity to make the filing happen in a way that looked independent. He said it flat and precise, the voice of a man who has done the arithmetic and arrived at the number and is now simply reporting it. The text was a warning. Sylvia sent it herself. Why would she warn you? The question sat in the car for a moment. Because she wants me to know it was her, he said. She's not trying to stay hidden anymore. Staying hidden was the strategy when she needed me not to see her. She sent that text because she's ready for me to look directly at her. He paused. She wants a conversation. And if you don't have one? Then whatever she has left, whatever piece of this she's still holding that Carver doesn't, she uses it. Elena looked at the road ahead. The estate was 12 minutes away. The city was thinning around them, giving way to the residential north side, the larger lots, the gates and tree lines of the kind of neighborhood that was purchased with money that didn't ask to be explained. The text said she knows about me, Elena said. Not about the operation, about me specifically. Yes, what does she know? Everything Reyes knew, Damien said. The arrangement, the contract, The transfer. Your name, your background, the pregnancy. He paused. She was the one who gave Carver the framing, the characterization of you as a financial instrument. That wasn't Carver's idea. He doesn't think in those terms. Sylvia does. The weight of it settled in Elena's chest like something solid. Not anger. She had done her anger this morning, in the study, over the frozen account and the voided contract terms. This was something colder and more useful than anger. She used me, Elena said, to get to you. Yes. And the federal filing, the allegation against me personally. Her construction, Damien said. Carver provided the mechanism. Sylvia provided the architecture. He looked at the road. She knows that the thing most likely to destabilize me is not the loss of the operation. It's the threat to you and the child. She's known that for 7 months, as soon as Reyes confirmed the pregnancy. Elena thought about the nursery, the cream walls and the cracked spine books, and the rocking chair she'd reupholstered herself. She thought about the folded piece of paper that had been in her coat pocket since November. I will not let this child be raised without kindness. I will not disappear when this becomes convenient for him. I will not become someone I'm ashamed of. She thought about Sylvia Voss, 53 years old, who had spent 19 years watching from a distance, patient in a way that none of the men had been, building something so carefully and so slowly that it had been nearly invisible until it was already inside everything. I want to meet her, Elena said. Damien looked at her. No. I'm not asking. Elena, she built this around me, Elena said. She used my situation, my name, my body, as instruments in a plan that has been running for 18 months. Whatever conversation happens with Sylvia Voss, I am part of it. She held his gaze for a moment, just a moment, because he was driving and she was not stupid. That's not negotiable. He looked back at the road. He said nothing, which she had learned was his version of yes. Sylvia called that evening, not a text this time. A direct call to Damien's personal line, which very few people had, which told Elena something about what Reyes had given her and how far back it went. Damien answered it on speaker, with Elena sitting across from him at the dining room table, and Diane Cho's documents still spread between them and the residue of a day that had been going since before dawn, settling into the air like sediment. Damien. Sylvia's voice was lower than Elena had expected, a cultivated contralto. The voice of a woman who had learned long ago that pitched low was more authoritative than pitched high. I imagine you've had an interesting day. Where are you? Damien said. The city. I've been in the city for 6 weeks, which I suspect you didn't know. I didn't. That's something. A pause. I'd like to meet. Tomorrow morning. Somewhere of your choosing. I want you to be comfortable with the location. We'll meet at the estate, Damien said. A brief silence. You want me in your house. I want you somewhere I control. You said somewhere of my choosing. Another silence, longer. All right, what time? 9. I'll be there at 9. A pause. Damien, I want you to know the text I sent from the clinic. I know why you sent it. I don't think you do, she said. Not unkindly. The particular absence of kindness that is not cruelty but simply a woman who has been past the point of performance for a very long time. I sent it because I wanted you to have the night, to know it was me before you saw me, so we don't spend tomorrow morning on that part. Another pause. I'm tired of the long game. I've been playing it for 19 years and I'm tired. The line was quiet for a moment. 9 o'clock, Damien said. 9 o'clock, she confirmed. And then, before he ended the call, there's a woman with you. She's listening. He didn't answer. Good, Sylvia said. She should be there tomorrow too. She arrived exactly at 9. Elena was already in the front sitting room when the gate opened, and she watched through the window as the car came up the drive. A plain black sedan, no driver, Sylvia behind the wheel herself. She parked and got out and stood for a moment looking at the house, and Elena looked at her. She was not what Elena had constructed from the outline of her. She was tall, angular, with silver hair cut short, and a face that carried the particular beauty of a woman who had been striking at 30 and had allowed the years to do what they did without fighting it. She wore a gray wool coat and carried nothing except her keys. She looked at the house the way people look at things they've thought about for a long time. with a recognition that is not nostalgia, that has moved past nostalgia into something more austere. Damien met her at the door. Elena stayed in the sitting room. She heard their voices in the foyer. Not the words, just the cadence, the particular rhythm of two people who have a shared history that is not warm, greeting each other across 19 years of distance. Then footsteps, and they came in. Sylvia looked at Elena immediately. Not at her stomach, not at the room, at her face. A direct, unhurried look, the look of a woman who has been thinking about this specific person for a long time and is now simply verifying the reality against the information. "Elena Marlowe," she said. "Yes," Elena said. "Sit down," Damien said. To Sylvia. Sylvia sat. Damien sat. Elena stayed where she was, standing near the window, because the window gave her the light, and the light let her see clearly, and she wanted to see clearly for this. "Tell me what you want," Damien said. "Not the Carver version, not the Reyes version. What you actually want." Sylvia looked at him. "The same thing I've always wanted," she said. "Standing in what your father built, in what you built on top of it. The acknowledgement that I was part of that house for 14 years and walked away from it with a settlement that bought my silence and nothing else." "You were compensated." "I was paid," she said. "There's a difference. I was paid to go away, and I went away, and I spent 19 years watching you build an empire on a foundation that your father and I laid together, and I received nothing from it except a wire transfer and your absence." She said it without heat, the factual tone of a woman reporting something she has processed completely. "That's not a complaint, it's a context." "And your play with Carver," Damien said. "With Reyes, that was leverage," she said. "The only kind I had. The kind you understand." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't want to destroy you, Damien. If I'd wanted to destroy you, I could have moved 8 months ago when Reyes gave me the full account structure. I waited. I constructed something that gave you a problem you could solve, if you chose to." "You threatened Elena." "I threatened a contract." Sylvia looked at Elena. "Not you. I want to be clear about that, though I understand if the distinction doesn't carry weight from where you're standing." She paused. "The supplementary allegation against you. I told Carver it was leverage only, not to be used as an actual instrument. He interpreted that more aggressively than I intended." "You gave a weapon to a man and told him not to use it," Elena said. "And you're surprised he used it." Sylvia looked at her. A long, evaluating look. "No," she said. "I'm not surprised. I'm accountable for it." She said it cleanly, without embroidery. "I am accountable for the fact that you spent this morning with a frozen account and a compromised legal standing because I built something that Carver turned against you in ways I didn't fully control." She paused. "That's on me." Elena looked at her, at the silver hair and the austere face and the gray coat and the 19 years of patience that had built something precise and devastating out of nothing but time and attention. "What do you actually want from this meeting?" Elena said. Sylvia was quiet for a moment. "I want the restructuring to include a formal acknowledgement," she said. "Not financial, not a settlement, a document, legal, filed, part of the public record of the restructuring, that acknowledges my role in the foundation of what Voss Enterprises became, my 14 years in that house, my contribution." She paused. "And I want a conversation with the child, when it's old enough. I want to not be the name that's never spoken." The room was quiet. Damien looked at the table. Elena looked at Sylvia. "If that happens," Elena said, "the Doyle documentation goes to Diane Cho's office and the Carver relationship is severed. Yes? Reyes. I have no more use for Reyes." Sylvia's voice was flat. "He served his purpose. What happens to him is between him and Damien. And the supplementary allegation against me. Withdrawn. Today." Sylvia reached into her coat pocket and set a folded document on the table. "I had it prepared this morning. It requires Carver's counter-signature, which he'll provide because the alternative for him is the Doyle exposure without any of the protections I've been providing." She paused. "He'll sign." Elena looked at the document, then at Damien. I was looking at Sylvia with an expression she had never seen on his face. Not anger, not calculation, not the cold management of a situation. Something older than any of those. The expression of a person looking at something from their childhood that they had made themselves stop seeing, and discovering that the act of not seeing it had not made it disappear. 14 years, he said. It came out rough. Yes, Sylvia said. You were cruel to me. She held his gaze. Yes. That's not something a document fixes. I know that. She looked at her hands on the table, the hands of a 53-year-old woman, without apology, without performance. I was 28 when I married your father. I did not know how to be in a house with a child I hadn't chosen. I handled it badly. I handled it in ways I'm not... She stopped. There's no version of that I'm comfortable with, but it's the truth. The sitting room was very quiet. Outside, the Chicago morning was pale and cold, the late March sky doing its reluctant negotiation with the idea of spring. A bird was making noise somewhere in the garden, something small and persistent, indifferent to the weight of what was happening inside the glass. The document, Damien said. The acknowledgement. I'll have Diane draft the terms. Sylvia nodded. And the child, he said. That's Elena's decision, not mine. Both of them looked at her. Elena stood at the window with the pale light coming in around her and thought about all of the things she had written on that piece of paper in November. The 3 lines she had made herself, the 3 promises that had nothing to do with contracts or money, and everything to do with what she was willing to be. When the child is old enough to ask questions, Elena said, we answer them honestly, all of them, including the ones about you. She looked at Sylvia. That's the only version I'll agree to. No managed narrative, no version of events that protects anyone's legacy at the expense of what's true. Sylvia looked at her for a long moment. Agreed, she said. It took 11 days. 11 days of Diane Cho's office and federal task force meetings and the careful, documented dismantling of the account structures that had held 20 years of Damien Voss's operation together. 11 days of Carver's counter-signature and Doyle's quiet removal from the task force, and the withdrawal of the supplementary allegation, and the slow, painstaking reconstruction of a public narrative that was not flattering and was not designed to be. Damien was present for all of it. He answered questions he had never answered before in rooms he had spent years ensuring he would never need to enter. He gave information that cost him in ways that were not only financial, the structural exposure of methodology, of decision-making, of the 20-year architecture of a man who had believed completely in the sufficiency of his own system. He did not ask for Elena's presence in those rooms. She did not offer it. What she offered instead was the estate in the evenings, the kitchen table, the tea she made herself, because the ritual of it had become one of the things that organized her days, the conversation that had become its own kind of structure over 11 months of learning each other in the specific way that shared consequence teaches people things that choice alone cannot. Marcus stayed. He had expected to be dismissed. She could see it in the first morning after West Randolph, the way he came into the kitchen with the careful bearing of a man who has prepared himself for a verdict. Damien had looked at him across the kitchen and said nothing for a long moment, and then said, I need you for the restructuring. And Marcus had nodded, and that had been the entirety of the conversation. Reyes was handled separately, quietly, in a way that Elena did not ask about and Damien did not elaborate on. She understood that there were limits to the version of honesty available between them, and that this was one of them, and she filed it in the category of things she had decided to live with. Not because she couldn't ask, but because some accountings happened between men in a language she had no standing in and no desire to acquire. Hargrove was gone. Not dramatically. Simply no longer present, no longer connected, the paperwork of his disengagement from Damien's legal affairs completed without ceremony. Sylvia had been right that Carver had no more use for him once the deal was done, and a man of no use to Gideon Carver found himself in a very specific kind of professional difficulty that had nothing to do with anyone in this house. On the 12th day, Elena went into labor. It was 4 in the afternoon, a Tuesday in April, and she was in the nursery because she was always in the nursery. In the late afternoon now, the light was best then, coming through the east window at the low angle of the spring sun, and the rocking chair faced it perfectly. She had been reading. She had put the book down. She had been sitting for a while, very still, paying attention to something in her body that had been different since morning in a way she hadn't wanted to name. And then it was unmistakable. She called out. Not loudly. The house was quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that had replaced the held-breath silence of the siege weeks. One of the household staff heard her and came and looked at her face and went immediately for Damien. I was in the study. He came up the stairs faster than she'd heard him move in 11 months. He appeared in the nursery doorway. She looked at him from the rocking chair. "It's time," she said. His face did the thing it had done in the clinic 3 weeks ago. The controlled exterior and underneath it, visible to her now the way things become visible when you've spent enough time learning someone's face. The full, unmanaged reality of what he felt. "Okay," he said. His voice was steady. The rest of him was not. "Get the bag," she said. "Blue duffel, closet, left side." He got the bag. He helped her up from the chair. One hand extended, waiting, not grabbing, and she took it and stood, and they went down the stairs together and out to the car. She was in labor for 9 hours. He stayed. The entire 9 hours, in the room, in the chair they brought him, not performing calm but actually attempting it with the focused, methodical effort of a man who has decided that this is the thing he is doing now, and he is going to do it as well as he knows how. He held her hand when she wanted it held and let go when she needed him to let go, and said almost nothing, because he had learned over 11 months that there were situations in which silence was more present than words, and this was one of them. At 1:47 in the morning, their daughter was born. She was 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She had Elena's dark hair and Damien's jaw, already, improbably, in the particular set of it. She came into the world in the manner of people who have been waiting to arrive and are not interested in being apologetic about it, loudly, completely, with absolute commitment to her own presence. The nurse placed her in Elena's arms first. Elena held her, looked at her. The exhaustion of 9 hours of labor was in every part of her body, and underneath it something that had no name and didn't need one. Something that was simply the fact of the person she was holding and the reality of what that person was going to mean. Then she looked at Damien. He was standing beside the bed. He had been standing for the last hour, unable to sit, the chair pushed back, his hands at his sides in the particular stillness of a man holding himself very carefully together. She held the child out toward him. He looked at her. The question in his face was not about whether he wanted to hold her. It was older than that. The look of a man who has spent 41 years understanding himself as a specific kind of person, and is being asked to hold something that will permanently change that understanding. She kept her arms out. He sat on the edge of the bed. She placed the child in his arms, showed him the positioning, the head, the crook of the elbow, the slight angle, and then let go. He held his daughter. She watched his face. There was no single moment of it. It was not a cinematic break, not the precise instant of a wall coming down or a man transformed. It was slower and more real than that. It was the slight loosening of his jaw, the way his breathing changed, deepened, slowed to match something, the way his eyes moved over the child's face with the same complete attention he gave to everything, but stripped of every layer of management and strategy and calculation until it was just attention, pure and undefended, a man simply looking at his daughter. His daughter looked back at him. She was 12 minutes old. She looked at him with the unfocused intensity of a newborn, the gaze that was not yet seen but was already directed, already pointed toward the source of the voice, the warmth, the heartbeat she had spent 9 months learning through walls. His eyes went wet. He did not look away from her. He did not manage it. Elena watched it happen and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the room wasn't already holding. They named her Nora, not after anyone. Not a legacy name, not a family name, not a name chosen for what it would signal to the world about the people who'd given it. Just a name they'd arrived at separately and then discovered they'd both been thinking of, which had seemed like enough. They took her home on a Thursday. The nursery was exactly as Elena had made it. The cream walls, the bookshelf, the rocking chair, the leather chair in the corner by the window that had come from a shop on Dearborn and had been chosen because the room needed somewhere else to sit. They put Nora down in the crib for the first time and stood on opposite sides of it and watched her sleep with the complete attention of people who have not yet been cured of the fear that she will stop. "She looks like you," Damien said quietly. "She has your jaw," Elena said. "She's 4 days old." "She already has your jaw. It's unfortunate." A silence. Then, from him, the sound she had first almost heard in January at the garden, the thing in the neighborhood of a smile, taking the right turn this time. "Unfortunate," he said. "It will be fine. Elena said. She'll grow into it. Nora slept. Her chest rose and fell with the reliable small rhythm of it. And outside the window, the April night was doing something that was almost warm, the season finally committing to itself after weeks of negotiation. They stood on opposite sides of the crib, and after a while the standing became less vigil and more just presence. The simple fact of being in a room where their daughter was sleeping. The federal restructuring was completed in June. Diane Cho filed the final documents on a Wednesday morning, and the voluntary disclosure was entered into the federal record, and Voss Enterprises, restructured, reduced, stripped of the account architecture that had underwritten 20 years of a particular kind of operation, became a matter of documented public record. The legitimate businesses survived. The restaurants, the real estate portfolio, the import operation that had been 3 years into legitimization before the crisis. Those stood. They were enough. Not what he had built, not the empire, not the name that had meant a specific thing in Chicago's underground for 2 decades, but enough to build from, enough to be real. The acknowledgement of Sylvia's role was filed as part of the restructuring documentation, a paragraph, formal and dry in the legal language that Diane had drafted and Damien had approved without revision. Sylvia had read it and been quiet for a long moment on the phone and then said simply, "Thank you," and ended the call. Elena did not speak to Sylvia again that summer, but she did not close the door either. She left it the way she left most things, without drama, in the position it needed to be opened when the time was right. Marcus ran the day-to-day operations of what remained. He was good at it in a way that was different from what he'd been good at before. The skills were the same, but the application of them had somewhere to go now, a structure that didn't require certain other things alongside it. He came to the house for dinner sometimes. He sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and held Nora with the uncomfortable, concentrating posture of a man who has not held children before and is determined to do it correctly. And Elena watched him and thought that people were very rarely only what their function required them to be. In September, Nora was 5 months old and had developed opinions. She had opinions about sound. She liked the specific voice that read to her, the rhythm of it, and she would track the sound with her eyes and her whole body the way a plant tracks light. She had opinions about being put down when she preferred to be held. She had opinions about the garden in the late afternoon and would turn her face toward the window with a kind of focused longing that made Elena think she was going to be someone who had difficulty with being indoors. She had, already, a way of looking at Damien that was its own kind of conversation. Elena had watched it develop over 5 months. The way Nora responded to his particular voice, lower than the other voices in the house, with a recognition that predated memory. The way she settled against his chest with the complete boneless relaxation of something returning to a known geography. The way she looked at his face when he talked to her, which he did more than he had expected to, more than he had expected himself capable of, quietly, in the evenings, in the leather chair in the corner of the nursery, telling her things that were not stories exactly, not the books Elena read with their accumulated voices and adventures, but simply the facts of the world as he understood it, offered to a 5-month-old who understood none of the words and all of the intention. Elena heard him once, from the hallway, not meaning to. He was telling Nora about the lake, about Lake Michigan in the winter, the way the ice built at the edges and the water kept moving underneath, and about how he'd stood at the lakeshore when he was 11, the year his father's management of him had become fully theoretical, the year he'd begun to understand that he was raising himself, and looked out at the water and made a decision he couldn't fully articulate then, but had spent 30 years living out. He said, "I made the wrong decision. It kept me alive, but I made it wrong." A pause. "You're going to make decisions too. Some of them will be wrong. The thing I want you to know, the thing I'm still learning, is that wrong decisions are not permanent unless you decide they are." Elena stood in the hallway outside the nursery door. She thought about November, about the piece of paper in her coat pocket which was still there, still in the coat, which hung in her closet, which she had not worn since the weather turned warm. She thought about the 3 lines on it and whether she had kept them. "I will not let this child be raised without kindness." She had kept that one. "I will not disappear when this becomes convenient for him." She had kept that one. "I will not become someone I'm ashamed of." She pressed her hand flat against the wall of the hallway and thought about that one carefully, the way she thought about things she needed to be honest with herself about. She had made a transaction. She had negotiated for herself out of necessity and calculation and the particular survival instinct of a woman who had been managing her own life since 17. She had walked into a house that was dangerous and made the best terms she could, and had kept herself present through everything that had tried to move her out. She was not ashamed of any of it. She pushed off the wall and went back down the hallway to give them the rest of the evening. That night, after Nora was asleep and the house had gone quiet in the good way, she found Damien in the kitchen. He was at the counter, not doing anything, just standing there with a glass of water, looking at the window. The same posture she had first seen at the beginning, in this same kitchen, in the early mornings when he'd started appearing in spaces where she was. The same man and a different one, both true simultaneously. She poured herself water and stood beside him. They were quiet for a while. "I heard you," she said, "in the nursery. The thing you told her about decisions." He looked at her. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Was it wrong? To say that to a 5-month-old who can't understand it?" "No," she said. "The words don't matter yet. The fact that you're saying them does." She looked at him. "She's going to know that you talked to her, that you showed up and told her true things. She won't remember the words. She'll just know." He looked at the window. Outside, the September night was warm for the first time in weeks. The season holding on, reluctant, before it gave way to the Chicago autumn that came in fast and without apology. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "The arrangement," he said. "The original one. The contract." He looked at her. "Is that what this is still? For you?" She looked at him. At the face she had spent 11 months learning, the jaw that their daughter had apparently inherited, the eyes that did their work without advertising it, the specific quality of stillness that she had come to understand as not coldness but concentration, the full attention of a man who, when he was present, was completely present. "No," she said. "What is it then?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "I don't have a word for it," she said. "It's not the contract. It's not a performance. It's not—" She stopped. "It's just true. Whatever it is. It's just the thing that's actually there." He looked at her for a long moment. "I want to build something," he said, "with what's left. The legitimate operations, the restructured company. I want to build something real." He paused. "I want you to be part of building it." "I'm not a business person. I know. I'm not asking for that." He turned to face her more fully. I'm asking if you're staying." The kitchen was quiet. Nora was sleeping 2 floors above them. The house was doing the thing it had learned to do. Breathing, settled, the sounds of a place that had become a home almost without anyone deciding that was what it was going to be. Elena looked at Damien Voss. She thought about November, about 47 sleepless hours, about a piece of paper in a coat pocket, and 3 promises she'd made to herself in a room where no one could hold her to them. "I'm staying," she said. He exhaled, very slightly. The smallest possible sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. Outside, somewhere in the dark of the September garden, the bird she'd been hearing since spring started up again. The small, persistent one. The one that seemed to keep its own schedule regardless of the hour, regardless of the season. The one that had been making noise through everything. She listened to it for a moment. Then she finished her water, set the glass in the sink, and went to bed. He stayed at the window a while longer. She heard him come up the stairs a half hour later, heard him stop, as he always stopped. She knew this now, had known it for months, outside Nora's room. A pause. The soft sound of a door opened carefully and closed the same way. Then his footsteps down the hall. The house settled into its nighttime quiet. Nora slept. The bird outside went silent, finally, the way all persistent things eventually go silent when they have said what they needed to say. And Damien Voss, who had spent 41 years building walls, and 23 of them building an empire, and 11 months learning what it meant to build something he could not lose without losing himself entirely, stood in the dark of his daughter's room and listened to her breathe. And the man he had been and the man he was becoming occupied the same body without resolution, without the clean break of transformation, just the slow and necessary work of a person deciding, one day at a time, who he was going to be. It was not a perfect ending. It was something better than that. It was a true one.